wildlife is concerning a rhino.
A rhino? Blimey.
Right? Yeah,
okay.
rhino. I used to live in Kenya when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minor. This rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like something out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, "Believe it, Dad. Just put your foot down, Dad. We're in a field. Put your foot down." This rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting its front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet.
Yeah.
And it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its 2 front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich, don't dirty minds, away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, Christ, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because it was the 70s. I was in floods of tears. And as a family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped off the car mirror. We got the message. Spanish animals aren't to be trusted. Jeremy, Brittany here from the United States. I was spurred by a rooster in my right foot a few years ago. Spurred? How do you get spurred by a rooster?
One here from Dan in Hampshire. Morning, Mike. Is an Aussie that has been dive-bombed by our version of the Magpie, which is much bigger, every springtime.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Glory. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 6. It's another brand new week. It's Monday the 14th of April. What a staggering weekend we've had. All sorts of amazing things have happened. The government's worked out that it's probably not a great idea to give the Chinese access to infrastructure that might be quite important to the future and indeed the current running of our economy, i.e. to wit, don't give them any steel plants, you know? Don't put them in charge of any airports. Don't let them build any nuclear power plants. Don't let the Chinese come in and buy all sorts of properties in London where they might be able to set up a great big super embassy. Oh no, they've already given them permission to do that. Oops. Never mind. Tulip Siddiq used to be the minister employed by Keir Starmer to fight corruption. Now she's apparently under arrest in Bangladesh. They've issued a warrant for her arrest. I presume David Lammy will be cooperating fully and extraditing her to Bangladesh to face the justice of her peers, of course. Meanwhile, we've got Jonathan Reynolds, the man who pretended to be a solicitor for about 15 years. He now apparently is in charge of British Steel, despite having had no business experience whatsoever, having only worked as a counsellor and a trainee solicitor for a very short period of time. Meanwhile, of course, they're all asking us to clap our hands for the MPs. And let's give them a very thorough round of applause, because some of them actually got up on a Saturday morning and went to work. How extraordinary. Maybe we should give them a medal or something like that. But I don't really know what's happening with British Steel. Nobody does. Jonathan Reynolds was on at the weekend. He can't really tell us whether or not they're going to actually have any energy to produce the steel that they want to make, because apparently it's stuck on a ship somewhere in the North Sea. Anyway, never mind all that. Charlie Rowley's here. We'll be looking through all the other stories in the papers, including, of course, the worst story of the weekend, the horrible, ghastly brother of the Manchester Arena bomber, who's now being held in custody. He's already in prison, but he was able to work in a kitchen where he could make weapons and boil oil so that he could throw it on prison officers. I mean, who on earth is running these prisons? We learned only a few weeks ago from Robert Jenrick that the prisons are overwhelmed by Muslim Brotherhood gangs, and nobody has done anything about about it. There's another record for migrants. 656 came across in one day. That's the highest ever, just the other day. We're going to be talking about the madness of anti-white legislation, which is being made not only in the police force, but in the NHS, of course, as well. Katy Perry's getting on a rocket later on today and being fired up into space. A lot of people will be very happy about that. I'm not really sure whether I'm happy about it or not. But it's 5 minutes past 6. It's Morning Glory. This, of course, is the home of common sense. Let's get it on. I'd say a very good morning to Charlie Rowley, former government advisor. How are you, Mr. Rowley?
Morning, very well, very well.
I see you're wearing a Lib Dem tie.
Well...
Have you gone over to the other side? Sorry, this is an election period, so I must confess there are other parties that ties you can wear. I guess I'm wearing a Tory one.
Exactly, I have worn red in the past.
Well, this could be a reform one. I'll just keep them all guessing.
Keep them all guessing,
yeah.
You know. But
maybe I'll change ties through the show, just wear a different coloured one every hour.
Exactly. No, thank you. Well, I thought it was quite bright tie for a bright morning.
Well, do you know, funnily enough, this time last week it was dark and the sun wasn't rising until around about 7 o'clock, and already just in a few short space of days suddenly the sun's rising as we start the show. So bring on the summer. Although that seems to have been and gone.
I think
it started raining yesterday.
This is the last of it. This morning
is it.
the
Absolutely
last
right.
of it.
Now, and we'll get on to British Steel in a minute, but I think we've got to kick off with this horrible story from the prison service, where ministers have been accused of allowing extremists to have sort of free reign of these prisons. Robert Jenrick only a couple of weeks ago wrote that, you know, these gangs of Islamic fundamentalists and Muslim Brotherhood types have sort of taken over in so many places. I find it astonishing that this guy Hashim Abedi is the brother of the other Abedi, Salman Abedi, who blew himself up in Manchester at the arena 5 years ago, I think it was. Well, maybe actually no, 8 years ago. But he's in prison and he's got access to a kitchen, and you just think, well, how does this happen? You know, how is he able to make weapons? How is he able to cook and prepare burning oil, which he throws over a bunch of prison guards?
Yeah, it's absolutely beggars belief. And, you know, when you are banged up, rightly so, for these kinds of offences, if you are a terrorist, you shouldn't have the freedom to go and be in the kitchens, for example, and be able to have access to melting butter.
You would think it's a sort of a no-brainer, isn't it?
Totally, totally. And, you know, more details have come out, as you say, this morning, where, you know, whether it's melting butter, whether it was using a baking tray to use that as the sort of the sharp end of the knife covered by some sort of tea towel or cloth to be able to use as the handle to go on and stab and attack prison officers. You know, these kind of, you know, evil, vile characters are overrunning the prisoners. No fault, of course, of the staff that clearly are under pressure there, are understaffed. So, but whatever's going on in our prison service needs to be looked into, because clearly you've got these people running the show.
And he made this hot oil attack on a female prison officer. You know, and I'm sorry about whatever you may think about whether it's right or wrong. Having female prison officers looking after these kind of mad terrorists seems to me also to be insane. And now we've already had a couple of instances, haven't we, where female prison officers are having affairs, in some cases very publicly, with inmates. And you just think, what on earth would give you the idea that having a female guard on a men's prison was a good idea? I mean, there's nothing good about it.
Yeah, I mean, and particularly people who are, you know, of this kind, who are, you know, rightly behind bars, who are clearly at risk. We should never be allowed to be free, and, you know, can plot and think and characterise any kind of evil, you know, thing that they can come up with, use any kind of material at their disposal to continue to do hateful and evil things.
And basically, this is a terrorist attack in a prison, is what is being said. It wasn't just an assault; it was an extremely serious and clearly premeditated and planned event. So it's now being investigated by the Ministry of Justice. But surely something has to be done about this guy, and he has to be put in some kind of solitary confinement, doesn't he?
Oh, totally. But I mean, you would hope that that was the case anyway, but clearly it isn't. But you know, this guy's obviously got to be moved. But it brings into a question about, you know, who's running our prisons. You know, there was a story I remember a couple of weeks ago where, you know, Sharia courts have been set up by these prisoners, you know, who are obviously of a particular faith, who are dictating what other prisoners.
It's okay to say it on this show. You won't get into any trouble.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, they are. You know,
but you do. I mean, in other sort of forms of media, people get cowed into not saying the word Muslim. It's insane.
No, you're
right.
This
guy is a Muslim scumbag. He's a terrorist, and I think he should be locked up for the rest of his life and never see the light of day. In fact, I'd put him in a box. You know, like those boxes they had in Papillon, you know, where you just go into a box and you just have to crouch in it, and you don't get any sunlight, you don't get any air, you get fed a little bit of food and water. That's the rest of your life. Thanks very much.
Well, that's the balance, because I know lots of people people will have views about the sort of the death penalty and taking people's lives if you take a life if you're put into prison. I don't think that's the case, because I think what prison should be is exactly as you've described. It shouldn't be a holiday, certainly shouldn't be a holiday camp. If you've taken somebody's life, or if you've committed a heinous crime, as this guy has, you don't get the freedoms.
You don't get, how do you fancy making a cheese omelette?
No, exactly. But, you should be, you've taken a life, but you should have you should see out the rest of your days. You shouldn't have an easy exit, as I think it is. Just if you bring back the death penalty.
And this guy, apparently, it says here, they don't give out bottles of olive oil as it's considered to be too dangerous. Probably too expensive as well, by the way. Well, you try and buy a bottle of wine's cheaper than a bottle of olive oil now. But apparently they don't monitor how many sachets of butter you can take with your lunch.
Yes.
So he's basically nicked a load of those and made them into a sort of a burning fat and thrown it over this woman. That's incredible. She's fine, but the two male police officers have got life-threatening injuries. They seem to be stable at the moment, but they were stabbed, both of them, in quite awful ways. It just beggars belief, really, doesn't it?
Well, it is, and that's 3 people, obviously, now out of the prison service for a length of time, and God knows what else is going on in that prison today. Is it secure? Do we have the right people in there? Does the prison have the resources? Are the prisoners that should be banged up for 23 hours a day, that shouldn't have the rights that they clearly seem to have at the minute, are they being monitored properly? Are they being ensured that they are not at risk to anyone else in the prison? And as I say, with those Sharia courts that have been set up, which do dictate what other prisoners should eat, what they should be doing on a day-to-day, prisoners are taking control of the prison. This is ridiculous.
I know, because presumably the idea is that, this is going to help them rehabilitate. Well, you don't rehabilitate terrorists. They don't rehabilitate. No. This guy should never be allowed back out onto the streets, because he clearly harbours deep hatred for this country and for the people in it. And he would only do us harm.
Exactly, and you're on the money there, Mike, and that's a no-brainer, right? You don't need a probation service to look at a particular case and say, if you're maybe young and you've obviously had a bit of a bad upbringing and you've got on the wrong side of the law, there's obviously a chance for rehabilitation there, and you want to see people, reform and give them a second chance. But if you're in jail because you thought it was okay to plot a terrorist attack, or if you're certainly the brother
and
of
blow
someone,
up some innocent children
at a concert, just enjoying to take away their freedoms, their futures, you're not going to be reformed. No. You don't need to be a trained probation officer
or a psychologist
to suggest, or maybe they just had a bad day. They are intrinsically institutionally mad, obviously, thinking that this is acceptable, but they should not have any of the freedoms. They should be banged up for as long as possible. They shouldn't see freedom in the way that we know it, but they shouldn't have these freedoms within prisons that they clearly blatantly do have.
And Robert Jenrick, obviously the Shadow Justice Minister, is absolutely hot on this, and he's saying it needs to be sorted out. This must be a turning point for the way we handle Islamist extremists in our prisons. He's written a piece in the Daily Mail. They've actually got a picture of the kitchen itself, where old Abedi was allowed to operate in Frankland prison, where he's serving for 55 years, apparently. The kitchen is equipped with sharp implements such as knives, graters and scissors, right? Mark Fairhouse, chairman of the Prison Officers Association, compared the facilities to a studio flat kitchen with room for one inmate to cook under supervision. I mean, it's extraordinary to me. As they quite rightly say, it used to be porridge in prison. Now it's kind of cook yourself a meal. Meanwhile, another story on page 2 of the Mail, prisoners who have been freed early. So, how they set loads of people free in the summer of last year. Loads of these criminals who were supposed to be freed and going to be tagged, because the idea was that, we're going to monitor them outside of prison because it's an alternative to prison. Well, loads of them are still waiting to be tagged. Because, which means basically, effectively, they're wandering about without having a tag on. Nobody knows what they're doing or where they're going.
Yeah, exactly. And, it brings into this whole question about, do we have a two-tier justice system in this country?
Oh, yes, I think we do.
I think we do, exactly. There are people who are banged up in prison. Somebody called Lucy Connolly, who was made headlines.
Still there, who was refused again at the weekend permission to go and visit her ill husband and her young children.
Yeah, all because of a tweet during what was clearly, a tense period where she was or nearby during the Southport riots. But a tweet can get you over 2 years, I think she's been sentenced to, but without any kind of parole or any kind of freedom.
And the permission that normally even violent prisoners are allowed to go and visit their families normally if they've been behaving okay in prison, she isn't.
Yeah. And at the same time, we've released a load of prisoners, one of which was a Times undercover investigation. One's a murderer, one's a paedophile that hasn't been tagged. You don't know where. We don't know where they are.
No.
They don't report.
Well, do you know how many people they let out? The tagging backlog apparently has reached 4,726. They let out something like 3,100 prisoners under the scheme last year, some of whom were tagged within 53 days. It's not much of a target, that, is it? So that's like practically 2 months they were wondering about. And how about this, right? This is the Channel 4 dispatches that you referred to. A murderer has been walking around untagged for at least 2 months. He said his legs were too swollen to fit the monitor.
Yeah, I mean, that's ridiculous.
What?
That is ridiculous.
You know, just make a bigger tag then.
Yes, yeah.
Right? Or say to him, in fact, I'll tell you what, we'll just chain you to your house and then you can't go out. How about that?
Yeah, exactly.
They put you on a chain that gets you out to the letterbox. You can maybe get out into the garden. I mean, I'm full of these ideas this morning. You know those things they used to have in the Roman times where you wear a sort of a, kind of a girdle attached to a chain and you're allowed to walk out a reasonable distance from the house, but no more than, say, 10 feet. So you go in the garden and you can walk around the house, you can get into the bedroom, you can watch the TV, but you can't leave.
Yes, yeah.
You know, that's what I call house arrest.
Well, yes.
I'm sorry.
But it's true. And, people will be wondering, how does this, come about? How do you get it's Circa, I think, is the contractor.
Circa, yeah. They're the ones that are making billions out of all the migrants, by the way.
But they're the ones who, they'll go and tag you if they can actually find you.
Yeah.
If you've actually given your real address.
Right.
I mean, if
your real name.
Exactly. And, if your curfew is, 9 o'clock, but you're monitoring people can't be found at the address that they put down. You can put down your local pub.
Yeah.
Be found there.
It
and
is
just pop down the road.
But they've got cameras that they can see people now using their phones in cars and criminalise them, but they can't keep track of thousands of quite badly behaved criminals.
But Circa's excuse is that, excuses might be justified, that they don't make the tag.
Right.
So Circa have got to go and pick up the tag from whoever the manufacturer is. They've then got to go and find who the prisoner is who's out on release to tag them. I mean, the whole supply chain there, when you've got violent people all the while running around.
All of these government-run organisations, it doesn't seem to, there's no sort of connection between what the left hand does and the right hand does.
No.
Then there's loads and loads of money being wasted on just the administration of justice.
Yeah.
And it's still not working even after that.
Yeah, exactly. And all the while, there'll be another story about another victim because there was a failure in the system.
Yeah.
And people that walking free that shouldn't be or weren't monitored properly. Somebody's got to get a grip.
Indeed. We'll come back to the problems of prisons and violence and rioters as well, because the Telegraph's got a story about a new report on the riots of 2024. The Commons Home Affairs Committee has come out and basically said the police got it wrong. Massively. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about British Steel. We'll talk about the Chinese influence on it as well, of course. Also, what about Tulip Siddiq, the woman who was hired as one of the best friends of the Prime Minister, who is still a Labour MP, by the way, had to resign back in January as her anti-corruption minister. There's now been a warrant issued for her arrest in Bangladesh. You literally couldn't make this stuff up. Let's get a voice note from Mary.
I have just spoken up today and I'm really, really upset because I've just seen that over 600 people came in on a boat to Dover, etc. You try and get through any of our British airports without a passport, you can't get in. Even with a ferry, you can't get in. What and how are these people just getting in with no passport or nothing? This is so unfair.
Mary, you're absolutely right. Mary, obviously quite upset. I don't blame you. 656 migrants crossed in one day over the weekend. That's yet another record for Keir I'm going to stop the boat Starmer, who's not only not stopping the boats, he's actually encouraging even more people to come here. And there's seemingly no respite for those of us who abide by the law, who play by the rules, who pay our taxes, and who get literally royally stooped every single week by this Labour government. This is Morning Glory. Charlie Rowley's here. We'll have loads more for you coming up after this.
listening software has been inserted into smartphones used by political aides, civil servants who report directly to Keir Starmer. Phones can be devastating espionage tools. Not only can spies eavesdrop on conversations, on top secret conversation, they can read every text, even encrypted messages apps like WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 21 minutes past 6. I'm Mike Graham, and this, of course, is the home of common sense. We've got a lot to talk about. Plenty happened at the weekend. Parliament sat on Saturday, if you remember. I remember the last time they did that was back in 2019, when Oliver Letwin was trying to find some kind of way through the Brexit stalemate that we were currently in. And I remember having to go in on the Saturday and sit on College Green and wait for them to do something. And basically nothing happened. There was a complete stalemate at the end of Saturday, as indeed it was at the beginning of Saturday. But on this occasion, this was all about British Steel. This was all about the government attempting to make out that they were doing something extraordinary, having caused a problem which they are now desperately trying to fix. Here's Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary.
As honourable members will know, since taking office, this government has been negotiating in good faith with British Steel's owners, Xingye. We have worked tirelessly to find a way forward, making a generous offer of support to British Steel that included sensible, common-sense conditions to protect the workforce, to protect taxpayers' money, and create a commercially viable company for the future. Despite our offer to Xingye being substantial, they wanted much more, frankly, an excessive amount. In this situation, with the clock being run down, doing nothing was not an option. We could not, will not, and never will stand idly by while heat seeps from the UK's remaining blast furnaces without any planning, any due process, or any respect for the consequences. And that is why I needed colleagues here today.
Surely the reason we got here was because there was no planning, there was no due process, and there was no kind of expectation of what might happen if they allowed things to continue as they were. And I appreciate the fact, and I no doubt some will point it out, that I believe it was Boris Johnson's government that allowed the Chinese in the first place and allowed Xingye, or whatever they're called, to take over British Steel.
Yeah, and I think, look, lots of people will be asking now, in retrospect, why that deal, took place, and did anybody not think this through properly, in a sense that maybe China, although we can want to do business with them, they're the second biggest economy in the world, but hold on, having such a big hold over our national infrastructure when they are going in the opposite direction. And the reason why it was costing so much is obviously because of net zero.
700,000 a day it costs to run this place, apparently.
Yes,
and they're now going to turn the furnaces into these electric arc furnaces, which Nigel Farage says in Port Talbot will never happen. He's pretty sure about that. And other people say the problem with this green steel that Starmer keeps talking about is that it's made from a sort of recycled steel. So it's good for some things, but it's not good for other things. You can't make tanks out of it, so it's no good for defences, because it's literally like it will just melt in front of a missile. And there are certain structural things that you have to build with steel that this green steel isn't any good for.
Yeah, exactly. And at a time when, China is going in the other direction to drill for coal that's actually using its natural resources, there's, allegations today in the papers that actually this was a concerted effort by China to deliberately close down the plant in order to make sure that the UK was continuing to be reliant on Chinese,
that doesn't sound at all far-fetched to me.
No.
I mean, on I think it was Friday, the union admitted they were on Nora Kunzberg that there were actual union members stopping the Chinese executives from the company from entering the plant because they feared that they were actually going to sabotage it. And when you get to that kind of level of, it's not even industrial espionage at that point, it's just flat out, trying to kill off the company.
Yep,
you just kind of go, well, who on earth in government thought this was a great idea?
Yes, I mean, knowing that now, and if that's absolutely true, then, it's beggars belief that the government was prepared to offer about 500 million.
So I presume now they basically just nicked the company off them and said, you're out. Is that what's happened?
Well, it's a bit like, I think you might have a pub brewery that's owned by the brewery, but the management is different. So all the different workings that take place in the pub by the manager, and we are the manager. But the company
because
is
they've said that the shareholders of the company of British Steel is still this Chinese company, right? But they're not actually involved in the day-to-day running of it. That's my understanding. Jonathan Reynolds, of course, now is the guy running British Steel.
Yes.
Which is slightly worrying, given he's never run anything at all. He hasn't even run a pub.
No.
Or a corner shop. But here he is now running one of the biggest companies in Britain. And let's have a look at what he said when he was asked about the plans for the future of the furnace and whether it could actually continue. This is him on Laura Kunsberg yesterday.
Taxpayers are now on the hook. So I'll ask you again, are you sure that you will have the supplies that you need to keep the furnaces burning?
I'm not going to get into the specifics of that for some very important reasons.
That's an essential question, Secretary.
It is, but giving us the chance to do that was essential, and I'm not going to make my situation or the nation's situation more difficult by sharing some specific commercial aspects of that. But what we have done, with the support of parliamentary colleagues, I hugely appreciate the presence in Parliament yesterday of so many colleagues to do that, was essential to maintaining steel production in the UK and giving us a chance for that transition to the future, which we need. I said in Parliament yesterday, it's not a magic wand, it's not a panacea, but without the decisive action by the government yesterday, all was lost.
Well, all might still be lost, I think is what he's saying, because he doesn't know, is the real reason he can't answer that question. He doesn't know whether he can guarantee that they can continue to create steel, because he doesn't know if they've got any coke which is currently stuck on a ship in the middle of the North Sea, whether that's going to come in and be delivered in time for the furnaces to carry on without having to switch off. But he also does know that Ed Miliband, who left the debate early on Saturday, funnily enough, even though he only lives up the road in Kentish Town, so he didn't have to rush off anywhere, he was the guy that closed off the coke production facilities in this country, so we can't actually produce any of the energy required to feed into the furnace.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, the answer to the question, Jonathan should have just said, well, no, I can't guarantee anything. But we've done all that we possibly can. We've got to talk to other people, and we're having conversations. You don't need to reveal the conversations that you're having. And, of course, there'll be other commercial partners or people that have come in that want to take over or think that they can take over. They will know if they've got other competitors that are doing the same. There will be someone out there, I'm sure, who will want to take this over because of its reputation, because of actually just...
Yeah, but, I mean, it doesn't make any money is the problem. I mean, what will happen now, right, is that there will be vultures who will start circling and go, oh, look, the government are running this, they don't know what they're doing, so we'll sign a contract with them and we'll rip them off. That's what will happen. Well, you know it as well as I do.
Well, there is that, but also if there is someone shrewd enough, and hopefully, with the ability to communicate where others have failed to the government to say, we'll take this on, but by the way, you've got to drop a lot of the net zero stuff that you're doing, which is why we're in this situation in the first place.
And of course, Labour's line on this was very interesting over the weekend, because I saw a couple of reports from Scunthorpe where they spoke to a local Labour MP who said the reason that we're going for green steel is because that's what the customers are demanding. And you just go, when I can tell when politicians are lying.
Yes.
And that is a straight off, absolutely that's a misleading statement. People are not demanding green steel at all.
Yeah.
If anything, people just want steel that's cheap, steel that's good quality, and they probably prefer it to be British made if it can be made that way. But what they're not looking for is substandard steel at too much of an expense.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think that's... funny enough, I think that's worse than lying, because that particular individual clearly doesn't know what's going on. But they have been so indoctrinated by the lines to take, by the party to say, we're going for green energy, we're going for green steel, this is what people... And you just take it as read. You don't even know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
So it's not even...
it's like Andrew Neil pointed out that on Saturday, every single Labour MP, or quite a lot of them, sent out exactly the same tweet with a picture of them travelling down to London or travelling on the tube in London to go to work on a Saturday. So it was some amazing thing that they were doing, and almost every single message was identical. So it was obviously something that had been handed out from Labour's central apparatchik communist state central to go, oh, make sure you give them this message, and the wording is almost identical for every single MP. And many of them didn't turn up. There was one guy in Blackpool who showed a picture of himself and his baby. He said, oh, due to childcare problems, I'm not able to make it into Parliament today. I mean, you think it was some kind of miraculous thing to work on a Saturday.
Well, yes. Yes, yeah.
Just ridiculous.
And, did they not know? When you become an MP or when you become a Member of Parliament, when you actually have to, legislate for the country and do things in the national interest, that you might need to give up, a Saturday once or twice.
Well, they would always say, we do work on a Saturday, but it's normally in our constituencies.
Yes, but this is too bad. You're going to have to rearrange your plans. That's part of politics.
And somebody also pointed out that I read over the weekend that if you happen to have been away on holiday, the taxpayer will pay for you to fly back so that you could appear on Saturday, and they'll also pay for your entire family to fly back.
Well,
it's great, isn't it?
It's
absolutely marvellous.
Nice work if you can get it.
Nice work if you can get it. Yeah. Margaret in Birmingham says, "Morning, Mike. 656 migrants crossing the Channel. Disgusting. They sat on Saturday, which was great for British Steel, but why can't they sit on a Saturday to stop the bleeding boats? We are losing our country." Well, yeah. I mean, I would have said, stop the actual recess altogether, because they'll be off now for about a month, won't they, before they're back again. Meanwhile, another probably 2,000 or 3,000 migrants would have come in. There are plenty of crises in this country to deal with, and some have already suggested that this British Steel fiasco, which was caused by Labour and is now being solved supposedly by Labour, is very timely for the elections, which I'm not sure it's going to help them, because an awful lot of other stories at the weekend saying, canvassers on doorsteps for Labour are finding it about as tough as it's ever been, trying to convince people that, the government's doing a good job.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, look, you only have a certain amount of sort of political...
capital.
Capital, exactly.
Yeah.
And to recall Parliament, I mean, look, people were saying, obviously, they could have... they knew this was coming. They could have done this on the Friday before they even broke up. Did they actually need to be recalled? Do we not have the powers in place?
Yeah, it was all a bit performative, wasn't it?
It was slightly performative. And
I mean, funny enough, they didn't recall Parliament to tell us they were going to sell off the Chagos Islands and ask us whether we thought that was a good idea or not.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there were actually lots of other questions. To be fair, I never thought I'd agree or find myself agreeing with somebody from Wales.
Yeah. My goodness.
In particular, Plaid, other parties are available. But, who was, I thought it was a very valid point to say, well, we didn't see this kind of action when you're talking about, whether it's Ellesmere Port in Liverpool, Port Talbot, obviously in Wales. It's Scunthorpe, obviously it's the two last blast furnaces and obviously 3,000 jobs at risk. Of course you've got to step in and do something. But I would much rather see actually politicians just get a grip and actually take action first, and then think about the things, the fallout afterwards. But at least you've taken action. No one is going to take Jonathan Reynolds to court or the government to court over a decision to try and save, I mean, unless you're one of those crackpot barristers who's defending Hamas.
Or Jolyon Moron, as I like to call him. Saw Fox at the weekend in my garden. She didn't have a baseball bat or a kimono handy. Imagine that, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, this is the trouble, isn't it? Let's just remind ourselves, of course, about what Jonathan Reynolds, who was never a solicitor, said in the Houses of Parliament in 2014.
Before the last election, I worked as a solicitor in Manchester city centre, and I would travel in to Manchester every day from what is now my constituency.
No, you didn't, because here's what he said this year.
I made a reference to my experience of using our local transport system in Greater Manchester when I worked as a solicitor in Manchester city centre. I should have made clear that specifically, Madam Deputy Speaker, that was a reference at the time to being a trainee solicitor. I would like to formally correct the record.
I mean, because whenever you say that you're a solicitor, that's always a reference to you being a trainee solicitor, obviously, isn't it? I mean, it's like, you would never call yourself a trainee solicitor if you actually were one. You just call yourself a solicitor. I would suggest only if you're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes and make out that you're better and more qualified than you actually are.
Yes, yeah. I've never understood why people feel the need to... I mean, I was a special advisor, but I never felt special or gave any particular advice at times. So I don't go around sort of...
But you weren't a trainee special advisor, though.
No, true.
I mean, if you had been, you couldn't call yourself a special advisor because you would not want to mislead the public, would you?
Yeah, exactly, yes.
He doesn't mind misleading the public because he's another lying Labour MP who's now found himself the boss of British Steel. I mean, how does that work?
Yeah.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
I mean, we might as well put him in charge of Bayern Munich and go, hey, Jonathan, how do you fancy managing Bayern Munich for a while? That'll go well. I think we've got another voice now. Here's James.
Good morning, Mike. Now, if I was Prime Minister, those boats will be stopped within a day. So, tick, that's a load of money saved. Right, next one. I will stop all money to regarding all this net zero. So no money goes abroad for that. Right, tick, more money saved. So we can actually start helping our old age pensioners, helping our veterans that have to live on the street. And by the way, if I was in charge, that wouldn't happen anymore. Yes, Mike, so I've already saved a load of money there. So I'm going to apply to be Prime Minister, and wish me luck, Mike. Cheers, mate. Have a great day.
James, I do wish you luck. You do a lot better than the one we've currently got, you know, who seems to think it's a great idea to redecorated Downing Street. We'll see a video on this later on in the show. Redecorated Downing Street in Sikh colours, and it was some kind of Sikh special day yesterday or over the weekend. Which, I mean, I think most people in this country know that Sikhs make a fantastic contribution to our armed forces. They make a fantastic contribution to the multicultural world in which we live. But people keep asking the same question. Why does he keep lauding, you know, every possible different dimensional religion apart from our own, the Church of England? You know, it happened to be Palm Sunday yesterday, which is the beginning of Holy Week. Now, I'm not particularly religious. I was raised as a Catholic. It was quite a big deal, Palm Sunday, because it was, you know, when Jesus supposedly rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, and it was the beginning of, you know, the week in which he dies and gets, you know, resurrected and dies for us and all of that. You know, but Starmer doesn't say anything about that. He's got no interest in any of that. He's more interested in Eid, and he's more interested in, you know, Ramadan, and now he's more interested in pleasing the Sikh community. I just find it absolutely staggering that he thinks that that is the way to proceed in this country.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And, you know, to hear stories, or you see it on the shelves, you know, we don't have Easter eggs anymore. We have all kinds of Easter dinosaurs and things, and, you know, schools aren't supporting Easter.
Wait till you see some of the stories we've got today about the anti-white NHS and the anti-white police. But let's have a look. I think we've got this Starmer Sikh video, once again accompanied by some really crap music.
It's really fantastic to be able to come together and to celebrate the contribution of British Sikhs to our nation. And what a contribution that is and has been and will be into the future.
I mean, it's almost as though there's nothing to worry about in this country. There's no, you know, nothing going wrong. You know, we haven't got an immigration crisis. We haven't got an NHS crisis. We haven't got a crisis in the police. I mean, you know, just beggars belief how he operates. Very, very strange indeed. And how much it costs to redecorate Downing Street like that, I've no idea. But we'll be back in a moment because we've got plenty more to do, by the way. We'll talk about why the police silence on Southport made the rioting worse. That's a new report. We'll talk some more about Tulip Sadiq. We'll talk about the Border Force, by the way, because as much as they have not managed to stop the boats, they have managed to get themselves some help because they've been paid money to be given free lessons in dog massage. I mean, I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's code for something. I don't think it is.
I don't think it is.
I think they're actually just learning how to stroke their own dogs.
Yes.
Paid for by you and I. Marvellous, isn't it? Also, wait till we hear this one. Foreign junkets for civil servants have racked up another 500,000 quid. They never go to anywhere difficult, though, like, you know, I don't know, Cape Town or Johannesburg to check out what things are like in the townships. No. They go to Barbados and places in the Caribbean, Dominican Republic, Dominica. All very nice for them, but not so much for us. 6:38, back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, coming up to very nearly 6:40. 40 minutes in already, the sun is up. It's looking like a very nice day out there. The absolutely brilliant sort of hot weather we had last week isn't quite going to be there this week, but we're being told there's going to be quite a lot of rain and a lot of traffic jams, of course, as well, because we are now fully into Easter Sunday mode, because it's just a few days away from the bank holiday weekend, which we'll keep you abreast of course, as well. Mike, good morning. To the only channel that make me realise I'm not alone. If we can deploy the army to Birmingham to clear up the rubbish, why can't we deploy the Navy and the Royal Marines to the Channel to stop more arriving? Well, that's a very good point. Before we talk about the bins, let's have a look at Katy Perry. I think we've got a little bit of Katy Perry action before her launch into space.
Thank you so much.
We love you.
We love you.
Bring us back safe.
We're so grateful.
We're counting on you.
We're counting on you.
We believe in you, too.
Thank you for helping us heal. 3, 2, 1. Take it up space!
It's the first all-women space flight since 1963. It's only an 11-minute trip, mind you. So I guess it's not perhaps quite like going into the space station and orbiting the Earth for 6 months or something like that. But yeah, she's going to be other women, including Lauren Sanchez, the bride-to-be of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. I mean, that's one way of getting rid of the wife, isn't it? How do you fancy going up to space in a rocket for a while? Oh yeah, okay then. We'll see you in about a couple of days. Yeah. Remember the ones that got stuck up there for like 9 months?
Months, yeah.
And Musk had to rescue them. And they've got this new look, these blue suits. It's all quite good fun, I suppose. And it's now something which very, very wealthy people can sort of do as a bit of a holiday.
Yes, yeah, taking a career to new heights.
Yes.
Maybe. But it's also, I mean, it obviously must come with its risks. I mean, obviously, you've got...
Well, I would think so.
Lots of people with lots of money can do some... I mean, like the submersible. I mean, that's at the other end of the spectrum.
That was awful, wasn't it?
An awful tragedy.
Yeah.
I mean, but just because you've got money and you think, all right, let's go into space...
Doesn't mean you've got any sense.
No, more money than sense is the
I think
exactly.
So. Absolutely right. And, you know, there's no point in them offering a refund, because if things don't go well, you won't be coming back.
Yes, yeah.
You know, it'll be cheerio forever.
Yeah, I don't think you get insurance, would you, if you went up there?
Can you imagine ringing up old, the Halifax? Yeah. Look, I've got some new travel insurance. Where are you going? Space.
Space, yeah.
Oh, okay then. Let's talk about what's on the front page of the Telegraph. Police silence over Southport killings made riot violence worse. The Commons Home Affairs Select Committee basically saying criminal justice system, and I said this at the time, has failed to keep pace with the social media age. And Starmer is responsible for hiding behind all this as well, because he claimed that, contempt of court rules prevented us from saying anything. Contempt of court rules meant that basically you could cause the trial to collapse of anyone who was charged with anything at all. And they now say that it's very clear that neither the law on contempt nor existing CPS guidance for the media and police is fit for the social media age. Finally, somebody says what we said, over a year ago.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think there were too many people that were far too sure of themselves by not being able to, or not wanting to say anything.
No, they used it as a shield. They literally used it as a shield.
Yes, exactly right. And I think, the report is absolutely right to call that out. What it's also said, which is wrong, fundamentally, is it said that the group of MPs have found no evidence of two-tier policing. Now, that needs to be looked into, again, I would argue, because we saw live as things were unfolding. If you were in the northwest, where the riots were obviously taking place, where there were lots of tension going on, the police were very, very clear. If you turned up, you'd obviously be arrested, you'd be taken to prison or whatever.
There was no quarter given, was there? I mean, it was not only were you arrested, you were straight into the justice system, straight before a judge, and straight into prison.
Exactly. If you were in the West Midlands, I think it was, however, we saw, it was on our television screens, the chief inspector there to say to what was a predominantly counter-protest, large group of Muslim people, to say, if you've got any weapons, don't worry, just put them in a bin over there, and everything will be okay.
And also leave the community leaders to sort out the miscreants.
Exactly. Right? If that's not two-tier, then I don't know what is. And I think, so I don't know how they've come to that conclusion, but on the former announcement, you're absolutely right. You're calling this out for what it was, which is some guy who's clearly got motivations of a terrorist nature to go in and commit the crimes that he did. That would not collapse a trial.
No,
putting that information into the public domain, I think people would have accepted it at face value. It wouldn't have then allowed people to think about whether this guy was an illegal immigrant or because he wasn't. But he was still
but they would have still benefited if they'd given the facts rather than given this kind of half a story. nonsense, where people were led to believe that maybe some of the things they were reading on social media were true.
Exactly, and trying to contain things, because if anybody thought, all right, well, you know, this guy's had a path where he's come from a different country, or if he's a different colour, or if he's a different religion, you can't talk about any of that because you'd be, racist. Well, no, hold on, putting the information
and it
out
also says one of the key details was that the unnamed suspect at the time was a Christian, was not revealed by Merseyside police after Chief Constable Serena Kennedy told MPs that she got the very clear view from the CPS that it would jeopardise a criminal justice case. So, you know, even if they'd been able to come out and say at that moment in time, you know, he's not a Muslim, he is a Christian, he is not an asylum seeker, you know, he's the son of immigrants, that would be one thing. But I think the word Christian would have made a big difference.
Yes, yeah, and I think, again, you know, that probably, coming from the CPS, would have only followed what the Prime Minister, their former boss, probably had to say. So it's probably not an organisation thinking for itself, actually to challenge...
But the CPS, of course, are blaming it on Merseyside police. They want to throwing each other under the bus, you know, saying that they decided not to issue the information. It was never revisited by them with the CPS. But, you know, I mean, clearly there is a woke agenda going on here, where the most dangerous people, as far as the government and the CPS are concerned, are working-class white people, not the terrorists that are actually, you know, causing absolute and utter havoc. And I must say, I read a terribly moving interview over the weekend in the Sunday Times, and it's because it's, as we mentioned earlier, you know, we're very much, you know, coming up to the anniversary of the Manchester Arena bombing, and it's a terrible... There's a book out about Safi, the young girl superfan, Safi Rose Roussos, who was 8 years old, the youngest victim to die in the attack, and it was an interview with her father, you know, and here we are, you know, 8 years after all of that, and you know, we were reminded that at that point people died because the emergency services didn't enter the arena for 2 hours because they were worried there might be other bombs, and this kind of, you know, this idea that the police and the various emergency services act kind of completely on their own and just shut everything down. And I remember that night I was working on talkSPORT at the time, and the news blanket that was thrown over that at the time was that, you know, there's been an incident at Manchester Arena, and that was it. And please don't... I don't think they even said it was an incident. They said, you know, people are advised not to go to Manchester Arena. And you're kind of going, well, what does that even mean? You know, the police have become specialised in not giving out information, where before they used to issue press releases and say, look, this is what's happened, we're asking you to do this in order to cooperate with us. But now what they do is they immediately throw a blanket over it and don't say anything to anyone.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And, you know, just as saying things has consequences, and, you know, if you get something wrong, for example, misinformation has its consequences, but not saying anything has equal consequences. So by inaction...
Well, it's lying by sort of non-admission, isn't it? Yeah. Effectively.
But inaction and not being in the street with the public, or not giving as much information as you can. I mean, the public, I think in all these kinds of situations, the public are not stupid.
No, of course not.
And I think what really gets people going is when people feel as they're being treated as though they're stupid.
And people also know when information is being withheld.
Exactly.
And they're being lied to.
And if you go out and you give a press conference and you say something that's wrong, or you... OK, people will forgive you, because most people understand you're working at pace, you're dealing with a difficult situation. If you come back the next day and say, yesterday we thought it was this, we now think it's that, at least you're updating the public and bringing them with you. But also when you get
the Prime Minister, who appears to be more upset with people rioting over the murders of 3 young girls in an otherwise, you know, tranquil, you know, dance class, where he wasn't about as angry about that, about the perpetrator of the acts. You know, he was more angry with the reaction to it than he was with the actual murder. And he might say, well, that's not actually true, but that was the impression he gave. You know, like, whether he thinks in his own head that, you know, the perpetrator was a horrible, ghastly individual, he never said it because he presumably thought it might prejudice the trial. But let's see, look how bad the police have now got. This is in Wisbech at the weekend. This was a political, you know, sort of election campaign issue. One party reported another party, but basically one man who I think is hard of hearing was accused by somebody of saying or asking somebody to speak English. Have a look at how the police dealt with it.
The other issue we've had reported, and this is a bit I need to speak to you about, is that, and I understand you've got a load of witnesses, and I don't know what's been filmed, so you may have filmed some of this interaction with the mayor? No? Because if you do, that would be really handy for us, but apparently during some conversations between yourself, apparently you have alleged, and we weren't here, so I don't know you've said it, but you've alleged to say, speak English? Or was that effect?
Speak clearly.
Speak clearly.
No,
okay.
the gentleman woman's partially deaf.
Yeah, okay. Speak clearly. Yeah.
So I couldn't even hear.
No, and that's fine, and that's why we've just come to speak, because potentially someone could perceive that as a hate crime.
Sorry for laughing. I mean, this is where we are in Britain in 2025. So if I had said to you, can you speak English, please, that could be a hate crime. It could also be a hate crime if I say, could you speak more clearly, please?
Yes.
You know, the inference being presumably that the person speaking was perhaps not originally from Britain.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, but also, you know, when you tell someone to speak English or speak plain English, it's because sometimes they're in England and they're mincing their words.
I mean, I'll do it quite often on social media when somebody will make some garbled comment at me, this is vaguely abusive, and I'll say, can we have that again in English?
Yes.
Please? You know, which apparently is now a hate crime.
Yeah. But all the while, I mean, you know, in that high street, there's probably be a shoplift, 3 shoplifts taking place. Someone on release that hasn't got a tag.
A couple of people being sexually assaulted, probably.
You know, and those officers are happy to go and talk to that.
I mean, to be fair to the police in this instance, the people who actually were the subjects of that conversation actually said the police dealt with it pretty well. But the fact that they're having to deal with it at all is a nonsense. And they issued later a statement to say that no crime had been committed. Oh, well, really? You're kidding me? You know, in the process of some political conversation. Unbelievable. Anyway, listen, more to do. Charlie Rowley's here. We've only got another 10 minutes or less. We're going to talk about the bin strike. Apparently the army are being sent in by Angela Rayner, despite the fact that she said she'd urged all parties to find an agreement. This is all about 17 guys on the bins, by the way. The idea that Birmingham is steeped in nonsense and rubbish now. But apparently they're not going to actually go and clean the streets. They're just going to work from home, the army, and give advice. Also, we're going to talk about £100,000 worth of cocaine, which was hidden on a British Airways plane by somebody who works for British Airways. Brilliant, isn't it? Let's get a voice note from Liam.
Good morning, Mike. Liam in sunny Folkestone. I just thought I'd let you know, in the 12 months prior to Stalin being elected, Rishi saw 31,500 come across in 12 months. Keir's up to 9 months, 31,200. He only needs 300 and he's matched Rishi's total for a whole year. It's absolute mind-blowing madness. Anyway, have a great week, mate. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Liam. Nice for pointing that out. Yes, the numbers are quite staggering. Another record broken by Stop the Boat Starmer. 656 migrants crossing in one day. Genius. Brilliant. Maybe they should put Captain Ahab in charge of the border force and see how he gets on. 6:52.
What we are debating today could have been dealt with at any time. The government surely knew that this was a crisis waiting to happen, and we could have debated this earlier in the week. We had Monday and Tuesday where we were sitting, where we simply had topical debates to talk about. So they could have raised this earlier. They've left it, why, till this weekend and recalling Parliament at great expense. when they knew this was coming down the line? Why didn't they deal with it earlier?
Is it a bit like Pam in Gavin and Stacey? Does he just love the drama, or why is he doing it now, do you think?
Look, Peter, I just watched the very robotic, scripted speech that the Prime Minister's given on this topic. It seems to me like it's all planned.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, coming up to 5 minutes to 7. We've been here nearly an hour, really. Charlie Rowley's here as well, former, of course, special advisor. As he said, didn't feel special in Downing Street, but never mind. Let's get a voice note from Andy on Jonathan Reynolds.
Morning, Mike. Andy in Portsmouth. I can't take that Jonathan Reynolds seriously. I really can't. Just listening to his voice. I mean, how can he be the boss of British Steel now when he is Mr. Bobby BS? I just don't get it at all. There you go, though. Keep up the good work, Mike.
I mean, nobody really gets it. Jonathan Reynolds is just a jumped-up councillor. That's all he is. That's all he's ever been. You know, and now suddenly he finds himself, you know, straddling the world as the sort of Secretary of State for Trade and Industry. Can you imagine when he goes to Washington to kind of negotiate tariffs and trade with the White House? I mean, beggars belief.
Well, I feel a little bit sorry for Andy. If you can't stand Jonathan's voice, he hasn't got much else to choose from. If you look at Rachel Reeves or listen to Keir Starmer, Ed Miliband, they're not voices. Exactly.
It's not. Well, this is the trouble. I mean, Starmer's little videos that he puts out, which are consistently just trashed. Like, if you look underneath the comments, are all anti-Starmer. It's the most hated Prime Minister we've ever had. Speaking of Angela Rayner, though, she's called in the army. It was only a few days ago that she said she was going to sort it out, and they were all kind of sitting down around a table. But unfortunately, 21,000 tonnes of rubbish now on the streets of Birmingham. She's asked the military to offer logistical support after 5 weeks of deadlock. But according to a piece in the Times, they're not actually going to be out there on the streets clearing the rubbish. They're basically going to be either working from home or sitting in an office with them. So what's the point of that?
Yes, helping with logistics.
Yeah.
But logistics of what? If you either got to logistically be out on the streets and do the job.
Well, here's logistics for you, Angela. You put a big lorry out there, you put all the rubbish in it, and you take it to a dump. That's the logistics, right? That's all you need to know.
Breaking news.
Yeah, breaking news. You know, you can put as many people in office as you like, but the rubbish is going to keep. In fact, the people in the office are going to make more rubbish that they won't be able to dispose of.
Yeah, and I don't know what the point of this, you know, the whole story is for her, because you would have thought...
Bring in some more people to make some more rubbish.
Well, because for Angela, you would have thought, you know, she wants to keep on side with the unions if she's got any sort of leadership ambitions.
Well, you would think so, but she's obviously slightly troubled by this one, because on one hand, she's got the council who she has to support, because they're her party, and on the other hand, the Unite union involved seem to be quite sort of revolutionary, you know, making the whole city suffer for 17 bin men.
Yep.
Which is pretty awful.
And we were told that there weren't going to be any strikes, and that's why we're paying off all these...
There's already another strike going on in Nottingham in the NHS, by the way, but speaking of which, quick one for you. NHS Trust discriminate against white job applicants by manipulating interview shortlists in favour of black and ethnic minority candidates. Another great story in the Telegraph this morning.
Yes. Well, it's racist. I mean, it's discriminatory. You know, you can't exclude people on the colour of their skin, regardless of whether you're black or white or or your sexual gender or
except
whatever.
The police do, and now the NHS do, and we knew the RAF did it, but they had to end up paying fines, didn't they?
Quite right,
when they deliberately kept white people out of the cockpit.
Yeah, exactly. We've moved on. I think, you know, all of these organisations are just too far behind or living in the past. You know, we live in a completely different world now, where it should always be about the best and the brightest and the best, and those that can do the job should do it. It doesn't matter of your background.
I mean, it's worse than that. Greater Manchester Police, who happen to be the police force with the most coked up and drunk coppers as well, apparently been staggering around the streets of Manchester asking anyone, as long as they're from an ethnic minority, reality. Would you like to join the police? Don't worry if you're not qualified. We'll get you in anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Brilliant.
And an insider said, because it was all, they knew, a whistleblower said it was all a tick-boxing exercise, and it sounds as though it has. And just talking about, obviously, the Manchester Arena bombing, you know, you put two and two together and think, I think that's probably the last kind of recruitment process Greater Manchester needs. They need a proper, thorough one to make sure that they get the best people in there to deal with the kind of atrocities that they've already had to deal with.
Totally right. Absolutely. Good to see you. Charlie Rowley, thank you very much indeed. Isabel Oakeshot's coming up in the next hour. This is Morning Glory. We'll see you after the news. Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week. It's the one show where you do not have to be worried about judgmental people because we'll do all the judging for you. Let's just have a look at how Humphrey Useless is now spending his time.
There goes your career, mate.
Over there a bit is over towards where all the migrants come in. He's jumping there. There he goes. He goes over the bar. Hello, and unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's Plank of the Week, he's got a sizable tank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the Week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Hi, I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and I've got a message for you. Welcome back to this blockbuster.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, coming up to 3 minutes past 7. I'm Mike Graham. The sun is up, ladies and gentlemen. We are in a Holy Week. You wouldn't know it, though, of course, because Keir Starmer doesn't really celebrate anything like that. He does, however, celebrate Sikh holidays. He absolutely celebrates Muslim holidays. Ramadan's great. Eid is great. He doesn't absolutely mention Easter. He doesn't mention Lent. He's not very keen on anybody supporting Christianity in this country, and that apparently is where we find ourselves. This morning, we awake to the news that basically the army are being sent in to sort out the bin strike in Birmingham, but in typical British fashion, circa 2025 style, they're not actually going in to start lifting the rubbish off the streets. What they're going to do is be in an advisory capacity, either sitting in an office or possibly working from home, creating possibly more rubbish to be put out onto the streets that nobody's going to empty. This bin strike, by the way, which is causing Labour no end of a pain, is all about 17 bin men who apparently don't like to have their jobs taken away from them and sliced and diced and sort of actioned so that they end up working for more hours for less money. I don't blame them for that, but surely they should not be able to hold an entire city, the second city in this country, to ransom. It's another absolute failure from the local council, who are so far in debt that they've probably got more debt than a small South American country. And that's Birmingham for you. We'll be talking as well about Jonathan Reynolds, the fake solicitor, the man who has never worked a day in his life in any business of any kind, not even a corner shop, not even a pub. He's only ever been a jumped-up councillor. He's now running British Steel, which we are now being told is run by the government, for the government, and with the best interests of the British taxpayer at heart. But of course, we're the ones that will get the bill. Currently, £700,000 a day is what it costs. The Labour government formed this problem. They're now attempting to solve it. Will they solve it? That is anybody's guess. And suddenly everybody's waking up to the idea that handing China a big piece of our industrial sort of infrastructure was probably not the greatest idea the Conservative government had. And let's not forget it was the Conservative government who gave it all away to China. That's just the beginning of the news this morning. We've got 656 migrants crossing in one day over the weekend, which means that Keir Starmer now, as it was pointed out by one of our very thorough listeners and viewers, is only 300 away from the whole year's worth of migrants that happened to come in under Rishi Sunak's reign. Also, Bangladesh are after Tulip Siddiq. Apparently, the former Minister for Corruption is now under arrest, and an arrest warrant has been issued for her on corruption charges. You literally could not make this stuff up. Meanwhile, police are being taught about slavery and how to be kinder to black people. Greater Manchester Police are creating opportunities and openings for any members of ethnic minorities who want to join the cops. They don't need any qualifications at all. And the NHS apparently have admitted placing non-whites at the front of all sorts of queues because they are being positively discriminatory. Absolutely unbelievable stuff. This is Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham. Thank God we've got some common sense here, because there ain't any outside. This is Talk. Welcome to Monday morning. I hope you had a lovely weekend. Congratulations, by the way, to Rory McIlroy for winning the Masters after all these years. The first major he's won since 2014. We should give a nod to his success, because it was quite an incredible triumph. It doesn't matter if you don't like golf. That's not the point. Let's say a very good morning to Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor. Isabel, very good morning to you.
Morning. Mike, I've got a challenge for you.
Go on.
Because I'm slightly concerned that Mike's Morning Glory is turning into Mike's Morning Glory Monday Misery. Please, can you tell me something to cheer me up? Because that list that you just read out there of everything that's gone on over the weekend just left me feeling kind of dead inside. Please do something.
Oh, I can give you two pieces of good news. One is Katy Perry's being fired into space later, which I think is going to prove us all right. After we won't have to listen to any more of her music. I'm sure she's going to have a very nice time. Only 11 minutes in space, but you know. And Jeff Bezos, I think, is bringing a whole new meaning to sending the wife on a trip. He's putting his own wife on this rocket that he's sending up to space, so he's going to have quite a bit of time to hang out. And also Hull is about to become the new Bordeaux, according to people who know about wine. So how about that?
That's all right. And maybe we could have some fun making a list of the top 3 people that we would like to send into space. I think I'd start with Jonathan Reynolds.
Definitely.
Is this new regime going to be like the Great British Energy Company, do we think?
Well, Jurgen could probably fit in a bit more work into his working week, because he's not got a lot to do at GB Energy, has he? So maybe he could sort of come along as a co-opted member of the board. But it's terrifying, isn't it, that a guy like Jonathan Reynolds, who literally until about I don't know, 9, 8, 10 months ago, was an opposition MP, not much to write home about, never really done much in his life, didn't really manage to qualify as a solicitor, worked as a councillor, a bit of a union organiser probably. He's now in charge of one of the biggest industrial companies in Britain.
I mean, all we can do is pray that he has really smart people around him to advise him. And this is always the kind of the weird thing about the way our political system works. You know, people get elected to become MPs, and then if their party wins a majority, they're then in cabinet positions having no knowledge whatsoever, quite often, of the area that they're in charge of. So you've got, I don't mean in this case Wes Streeting is very competent, but, in the past you've had health secretaries that know nothing at all. Yeah. We've had chief secretaries of the Treasury with no economic knowledge. I remember many years ago, Andy Burnham was made chief secretary to the Treasury under the last Labour regime, and he hated the job. He didn't know anything about economics. He's the first to admit he was the wrong fit for it. And this, you know, sometimes you can bump along okay with this if you've got really good civil servants. But I don't know about you, Mike, but I don't have a great deal of confidence in our civil service and that they'll do, you know, what needs to be done to make this rescue operation sustainable.
Well, like much of what this government tells us, it's only half the story, isn't it? Because first of all, it's not a rescue. Jonathan Reynolds is at pains to try and point out that they know what they're doing, which of course they don't. The coke that is needed to fire up the furnace in the first place is not actually in the country yet, as far as we know. It's still on a ship, which has to be brought in from overseas because we closed down the only coke manufacturing facility left in this country. So, you know, this whole disingenuous nonsense of, you know, we've all come back on Saturday to solve all problems and we've fixed everything. Well, they haven't fixed anything, have they?
I mean, I just found that all so ludicrously theatrical. You know, they had so many weeks and months, in fact years, to know that this problem was brewing, and then at the absolute past the 11th hour they theatrically summon MPs from all over the country to go and sit in Parliament, knowing that it's going to create a big drama and a big positive headline about Labour saving the steel industry that it's done absolutely nothing to prop up. And you're right to point out that it was the Tories that made that disastrous decision, you know, to allow the Chinese to take over this thing. And meanwhile, I read over the weekend that we're importing 50,000 tons of coal from Japan.
Yeah.
Did I read that right?
From Japan, which is a net importer of coal. It's not even their coal we're buying.
I mean, just look at the geography of that. I don't know where they get it from, Australia or something. I mean, Australia actually still does produce this stuff.
Yeah. I think they buy much of it from China and India, so it might end up being Chinese coal, ironically.
Would not surprise me at all. The whole thing is a complete and utter mess, as is the bin situation, quite literally. What, the army are being brought in, but they're just going to sit in a tent, are they, or advisory capacity? I just want to see people clearing this stuff. It feels to me such a failure of leadership and in a sense a community failure. As you've pointed out, there's only a handful of people on strike. Understand no one wants to do a load more for a load less. I mean, a lot of us having to do that all the time, but I understand why you know, bin men might be pretty hacked off with that. But are you really telling me that the whole of Birmingham doesn't have a bunch more suitably qualified people that could step in, offer them 2 or 3 times the money just to step in and resolve the crisis while something else is worked out? I mean, just leaving it there to mount up like little black Mount Everest.
It's awful. It's horrific. And it does, and I mean, it's more than just, for me, symbolic of what happened in the 1970s. You know, it reminds me of it because that's exactly what happened in the 1970s, and it was the beginning of the end of the Labour government because, you know, people need certain things done. You know, it doesn't matter how rich you are, if you're not getting your bins emptied, you know, it's a mess. It's horrible, there's vermin everywhere, it stinks, your quality of life is immediately reduced by a factor of 100, you know. In the same way that, you know, if the crime on the streets is not controlled, it starts to eat away at the very heart of the country, as it's now doing. If immigration is not controlled, all of the things that lead to our quality of life deteriorating, and you know better than anybody why that's happened. It's the beginning of the end. There's going to be more strikes this summer. We've got more migrants coming than ever. We've got, you know, a civil service which is completely sort of holed below the waterline. We've got services like the NHS which can't be fixed. I don't know where we go with this stuff.
I don't know, Mike. You know, we've got council elections coming up, so people can maybe try to make a difference by how they vote. But, you know, I don't know, this morning I just feel profoundly upset about all of this. We have such a great country. The country's got so much going for it. Look at all the wonderful things about Britain, and yet, you know, we're just destroying it with this stuff. We're destroying it through incompetence. We're destroying it through ignorance. We're abusing our institutions. You know, you played that clip earlier of the ridiculous situation where we've infantilized our population to the extent that they call the police when someone says either speak English or speak clearly. I don't know which one of those things it is. That's playground stuff in a nursery. 2 or 3-year-olds. That kind of exchange would not need to involve even the kindergarten teacher, never mind diverting our police for that kind of nonsense. How have we got ourselves into this position?
Yeah. Well, apparently we've been led by the politicians and led by local councils and led by this kind of wokeism that has infected every single civil service department, it seems to me. I mean, this morning, as I say, there's a story in the Telegraph about the NHS putting non-white people at the front of the queue for all sorts of things. We've got Greater Manchester Police literally walking up to ethnic minorities in the street, asking them if they want to become police officers. Police in West Yorkshire talk about slavery and how they should respect black people and all of this and apologise for the way they've been treated. I mean, that's how we got here, because we've now got an infantilised police service, it seems to me.
I can't imagine the police want to be doing this kind of work, truly. I mean, who joins
No,
the police?
I disagree. I think the people who have joined the police in recent times are these people. They're the ones who want to be very sure that nobody's committing hate crime, because that's the most important thing that's wrecking Britain. I think they genuinely believe that, cobblers, because they've learned it at university.
Well, if that is the case, then we're well and truly screwed, because then, you know, a change of leadership isn't going to make a difference for a bit longer than I'd like it to. Yeah. Perhaps there's a generational thing here, and you've got an old guard of cops that really don't want to be wasting their time going up to people saying, did you say speak English? Because it could be a hate crime. And maybe you've got a younger intake, perhaps the ones that have been recruited via positive discrimination, whose whole culture and outlook on the world is one of endless grievance and victim state. We have got to change a kind of public mindset here, the mindset where people continually looking to someone else because they've got a grievance, they feel that they're owed something. That is a really, really corrosive culture. People have got to learn that they've got to get out and shape their own destiny, rather than endlessly saying, well, I am where I am because of white privilege and colonialism and slavery. I mean, all this is an absolute load of nonsense, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, because it might be ridiculous and people might be listening to this going, yeah, silly old fool, like the times have changed. But I grew up under Thatcher, in the early 80s when she was in charge of Britain. There was a real kind of sense of can do. It was like, the world is your oyster, you go and do whatever the hell you like and you can be a success. And that was very much how people felt. And that was very much how the world was in those times. I went to America when I was 23. I lived under Ronald Reagan for 7 or 8 years. It was fantastic, and I worry that people have lost. I don't think that's changed. I think you can still have a great life and you can still be successful in this country, but I think people are frightened of doing it because they've been told not to.
Well, there's a bit of that, but I also think that if you make the safety net so vast and so incredibly all-encompassing, then people lose their motivation. Yeah. It's like when you've got very rich people who give their children a huge amount of money. Yeah. No surprise that the children don't go off and make their own future for themselves because they don't have to. It's not actually doing your kid any favour, much as it's lovely as a parent to be able to make life easier than you had it. So if you say to a population, don't worry, we're always here for you, even if you're having a bit of an off period in your life, you're feeling a bit blue, don't worry, you can claim mental health benefit, we'll give you a car, etc. Then it basically diminishes personal responsibility. And this is an ideological discussion. It comes back to the basics of, do you believe that people should be self-reliant and that they can create the best lives for themselves if given the right opportunity and the education, or do you think it's the job of the state to kind of swoop everybody up, tell them what to do, and give them handouts? And we're in the second category and have been for a very long time.
And it's the government that also perpetuates that myth, because the government more or less says, we will take over and we will take over your life, we'll take over your steel industry, we'll take over, everything else possible that we can to make your life better. Well, no, I don't want you to do that, thanks. I'd rather just do it myself. And so would the rest of the country, because you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, they had to step in, otherwise that would have been game over, I guess. But, it comes back to whether or not we have any confidence in it.
Well, guess what? It might be game over anyway. And I mean, one of the things that was, the holding pattern apparently was that we didn't want to be the only G7 nation that didn't produce its own steel. Well, if all we produce is green steel, we might as well not bother.
Well, that's also true, yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sorry to leave you on the same line that we started off on. So I've got nothing else I can give you other than a funny story, which isn't funny. £500,000 spent by credit cards used by civil servants on trips around the world. Fact-finding missions, basically, many of them. Select committees, groups of MPs and civil servants who have scrutinised Whitehall departments go on fact-finding missions, but they always find themselves in places like Barbados and Dominica. They never find themselves in sort of, Krakow or, anywhere cold and dark in the middle of winter. They always seem to find themselves in the Caribbean.
I mean, this is a bit of a shift because now MPs are incredibly paranoid about going anywhere like that. Even if there was some kind of apparent justification for it, they don't dare go on anything that could be classified as what you and I might call a junket or a jolly. But it seems that the shift has been towards the civil service doing it because they know that they get away with it because they're faceless. We don't know who they are. One way or another, it's basically more jollying at taxpayers' expense.
Yeah, absolutely right. Isabel, I'm sorry I couldn't give you more good news this morning. We'll see what we can do through the rest of the week as we get our way through towards Easter. Isabel Oakeshott, Talks International Editor there. A little disappointed with the bad news this morning. Let's get a voice note from Sean.
Morning, Mike. Sean from Grimsby here. So let me just get this straight, mate. White people can't join the police. White people can't join the NHS. And white girls can't get justice. And all this is done for what? To make us all integrate better. I can smell something here, Mike. Doesn't smell very pleasant either. Great show, mate.
Yeah, and so that we can all integrate better. How do you think that's going? Just ask Keir Starmer. He won't be able to tell you the truth because it's incapable of doing so. 21 minutes past 7. Ian Duncan-Smith coming next.
This is Hashem Abedi in HMP Franklin in Durham. So he attacked 3 prison officers with weapons and cooking oil in a high-security jail. He's serving life for 22 murders in that Manchester Arena bombing. Just absolutely shocking. So the officers suffered burns and stab wounds. He threw hot cooking oil over them and then used homemade weapons to stab the guards. You and I talked about this earlier, but just in terms of that, there are lots of questions. How on earth is this man allowed cooking oil? How is he in a kitchen? How does he have homemade weapons? Why isn't he in solitary isolation?
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:24. I'm Mike Graham. Mark from Hebburn says, seeing as an arrest warrant has been issued for Tulip Sadiq, I assume David Lammy is sending the police for her to deport her, seeing as he would have Benjamin Netanyahu arrested if he set foot in the UK, you know, international law and all that jazz. Well, quite right. Sean from Grimsby says, the government can't run a bath, never mind a steel plant, while shipping in coal from Japan. You could not make this guff up. Well, you really couldn't. Let's talk to Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, MP, Conservative Party, former Conservative Party leader, of course, who knows not only a thing or two about running some businesses, but also a bit about China as well. So Ian Duncan-Smith, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
I mean, I suppose the big question here is, you know, the government say they've taken over British Steel, that it will now be run sort of, you know, by the taxpayer, for the taxpayer, paid for by us, run by Jonathan Reynolds. But have they actually rescued it? That's not really clear, is it?
Well, it's a little unclear because, well, it's quite a bit unclear because they've taken the powers. They're quite sweeping powers, by the way, because they haven't actually nationalised it. What they've done is taken the powers to direct it. And they can do quite a lot of things under this particular bill. We, in Parliament, said they should have a sunset clause in it, which means they have to come back to the House in 6 months and then again in a year's time, if these powers are still there, to explain why they continue them. So they have to vote to continue the powers. We don't want them to take this over on the basis that the government can run it in perpetuity. It's really a case of, we need to know what you've done, you report back, and if we don't like it, we can vote down the bill.
Because it's more like a sort of boardroom coup, isn't it, where the Chinese company Jingjie remain the shareholder, but they're not on the board anymore.
My personal view is we should be clearing them out. Because I smelt a rat over this some time back. I advised that I said to the last government, don't let a Chinese company take over our pretty much last remaining blast furnace. The reason is because that produces the best steel that you need. It's the steel we need for aircraft, for the military. We need them for tanks. Also need them for cars. Really good steel, not some of this bad steel that comes across from China. And why would they take over an organization like this, which they knew would need a lot of investing in, and then it looks like tentatively step away from it and eventually ask and say they're going to close the blast furnace? Now, the reality is the blast furnace needs, it's perfectly functional now, but it does need some investment into it to get it up to speed. And then if they do, an arc furnace maybe, which is an electrical one, but, you know, that's way down the road. So the key question is make sure it's up and running properly right now and then make improvements. They didn't want to do that. Now, of course, if you look very carefully, China overproduces steel massively. They produce about, I think it's about 50, 60 billion metric tons of steel a year. They don't use most of that because their property business has collapsed, which means that they've got a lot of spare steel, no buildings being built. The result of all of that is they've been dumping it. They've been dumping it on lots of countries. South Korea has complained about them. Vietnam said enough's enough. Europe is now going to put tariffs up on them. We're the only country that seems to have taken no action on China. Worse, we're kissing their backside at the moment by running over there with every, including, I think I was on your program the other day talking about the chief of the defense staff. What an outrage that is. So the key here is the only reason to have taken these powers is to reset and then get somebody else to take it over in the commercial world and not the Chinese. So they need to keep it running only for the period that it takes to ensure the investment is right and another company or somebody else takes it over. But right now we do need this. It's strategic. Because without this, and we're trying to build up the armed forces, we'll be importing steel mostly from other places. And what's interesting about this all, in the middle of the debate, Mike, was the final comment, which I made and others made, which is, you know why we can't make steel at the moment in this country? Is because we have the highest energy costs in the whole of the world. Our energy costs are ridiculous. They're $500 per megawatt hour. Germany, just across the channel from us, Germany's at 250 or so, and I think France is even lower than that. So even in developed Europe, they have cheaper energy costs. So it's net zero. It's this mad helter-skelter rush by Ed Miliband to destroy us all by going bonkers on net zero, when we really need to take a long pause over this and use what we've got. And I was challenged on this, and I said, well, we live on an island of gas. Why aren't we drilling for our own gas? I know of no other country that would not make use of their gas and oil resources like we are failing to do. We're even cementing up the one shale gas probe we had earlier on. So it's ridiculous. It's all mad.
Yeah,
that's why.
It really is. And also, if the electric arc furnace is brought in, that won't be able to produce the steel that you talk about that we need so much for the military, for the airline business, and for cars, because green steel is not what you might call, battle safe, if you like, because it's made, generally speaking...
It's not virgin steel, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's recycled steel, and if a missile hits it and it's on a tank, the tank will just literally melt.
Yeah, it's what basically the Chinese would send us. So if we don't have the blast furnace, what their plan to do, and that's why I smell a rat on this, was to send slab steel to us, which is not virgin steel. It's the steel they want to offload to the rest of the world because they've overproduced it. And of course, the result is they subsidize all their industries. They break all the WTO rules. They've gone contract after contract, whether it's Huawei or whatever, where they're able to outbid all of the commercial companies in the Western world because we're not allowed to subsidize our companies, but they are. And so all of this tells you we should never have got involved with China in the first place. And it's time for us now to stop this madness of rushing over there to see if we can do arrangements with them. All they do is dump product on us.
Well, I've got James Murray, the Exchequer Secretary of the Treasury, coming on the show later on. What should I ask him about this?
How long does he plan to hold on to this? How much money does he plan to spend on it? Taxpayers' money, of course. And why are they still chasing after China for deals when they never invest money in us? The only place they ever invested money under the old ridiculous golden era was in the nuclear business. And the why they did that is because they sold most of the stuff to us that was the nuclear equipment at the same time, but we managed to get them kicked off it. So they were out of that by the last government. But they should be in the upper tier of FIRS, which is the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, which would then define them as a threat. And they are a threat to us every day that we live. They are a threat. And they support Russia in the war in Ukraine. And we've seen what Russia does. Destroys buildings, kills people in civilian life, nothing to do with directing the war. That's what they're up to. So we've now got to get and look at this handshake that you've got going on with President Xi. President Xi is saying to himself, God, what a mug this is.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about the motivation of the Chinese originally? Are you one of those who thinks that they got involved in the steel business in this country in order to wreck it?
Well, I have to say, in almost everything else that they do, they don't do it for no reason. They don't do it for just commercial reasons. The reality is that if this furnace was shut down by the Chinese company, they would become net importers of slab steel, which is what the Chinese are desperate to do at the moment. And what they would have done with that would rebadged it as British steel, and then it would be shipped off to avoid tariffs in lots of different countries. So they would have been able to satisfy themselves by offloading their own steel, but having it rebadged. So that I'm very suspicious. And now we're about to give them this embassy, for God's sake, which I've been fighting against. One of the biggest embassies in fact, it'd be the biggest embassy in the UK, right opposite the Tower of London, across all the communications lines, east, west, and to the city. And they're going to put probably 100 to 200 more spies inside the embassy, and the government has called this in because they want to give it to them. Honestly, you couldn't make this up.
Yeah,
it's like a bad novel, really.
It is quite extraordinary. And what about Jonathan Reynolds, the man who, for a long time, maybe as long as 10 years, pretended that he'd worked as a solicitor, then admitted that he actually, misled us all, managed to get that wrong. He's now running British Steel. I mean, he has no qualifications whatsoever in business of any kind.
Well, the key thing is that this whole process lasts as short a time as possible, which is why I was very keen and still remain keen to make sure that they come back to us very quickly about what their plans are for it. I mean, we had to have this debate on Saturday. We were all called back for the Saturday debate. I don't have any problem with that if it's an emergency. But I thought it was an emergency, but I gather that the coal itself still hasn't made itself way to the plant. So if it was such a rush, why wasn't it there that evening? Why didn't they just seize the damn stuff and take it through? That was the key point to this, that they would make sure this furnace kept going. And that, it seems to be the key, and I'm still waiting to see whether or not they've actually done it.
It's still not clear where that coal is. We think it's still on the ship.
If it's still on the ship, we should have seized it by now.
Interesting.
If that's the point of the legislation, that's what we should have done.
Right. Well, we'll find out whether that's the case later on in the show. Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, as ever, thank you very much indeed. Former Conservative Party leader who spoke, of course, on Saturday in that British Steel debate. Got plenty to say about Labour cozying up to China and why the Tories should never have allowed the Chinese to buy the plant in the first place. But the big question is, how much is this going to cost us, the taxpayer? And do you really trust Labour to run it right? Because I don't. 7:34.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:36. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10. Of course, Julie Hartley-Brewer will be along then. We've got much more to do between now and then. We've got a piece on the front page of The Telegraph today in which it says that police silence over the Southport killings made riot violence worse. That's one of the stories we're going to be talking about throughout the course of the show. A Commons Home Affairs Select Committee said the criminal justice system has failed to keep pace with the social media age. And you'd have to say that could apply to an awful lot of areas of justice and social media, couldn't it? Including, of course, the grooming gangs, the rape gangs. It was only last week, wasn't it, that Jess Phillips basically decided to kill off a national inquiry into the rape gangs and say that it's all going to be conducted locally. And if they need any more money, then we'll supply it. But they haven't really made any kind of attempt to do what they said they were going to do, which was to run a particularly strong and judicial national inquiry, which would have involved seizing people and telling them they had to appear before the committee and make sure that they would provide information and evidence under oath. That's not now going to happen. Let's talk to Georgina Halford-Hall, CEO of Whistleblowers UK, because, of course, they championed the campaign for the Whistleblower Bill, which is due for a second reading in the Commons on the 25th of April. Very good morning to you, Georgina. Welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. I mean, basically, legal action might now be something that is forthcoming from this whole situation. Tell us about that.
Well, let's take it back a step here, because child abuse is nothing new. The successive governments have totally failed all of the children who are being abused in this country. And they've actually abused all of the whistleblowers who are speaking up about it, because there is no shortage. Every week we have somebody from policing, social services, education, even NHS, who are talking to us about how they've raised concerns about the abuse of children or the abuse of vulnerable people. Nothing is happening. So what we really need is a champion of champions, and that should be the Prime Minister, let's face it. And as for what happened last week, Jess Phillips could only have withdrawn that funding and withdrawn that initiative with the consent of the Prime Minister. I actually think that we are going backwards and not forwards at this current moment in time.
Yes. It doesn't feel as though there's any interest, does it, in this government's investigative powers? I mean, they're very happy to run panels and all sorts of investigations into many things. They'll set up an inquiry at the drop of a hat on all sorts of matters, but they just don't want to go anywhere on this one, do they?
No, it isn't. The truth of this is that people, I just don't believe that politicians care. The church has failed, everyone's failed, and yet they're all sitting happily on their, polishing the seats of parliament in one way or another. And what they have got is an oven-ready bill, to use the former business secretary's terms, in the whistleblowing bill. It sets out to protect every single citizen. It takes it out of this ridiculous position of going into employment tribunals, where the only thing they're looking for there is, did a whistleblower suffer a detriment? Can we give them compensation? Nobody in over 26 years has investigated a single case that's gone in. So all of those crimes, all of that child abuse, all of that suffering has gone nowhere, and it's left to whistleblowers like myself and all of the wonderful colleagues and people within our organisation to do the job of the government. What we have here is an opportunity to ensure, as Maggie Oliver wants, to hold people to account. We do too. This office will do exactly that. We need one place with statutory powers to protect whistleblowers, to investigate allegations, hold those people to account who are responsible, but more importantly, to educate people so they know what to look for. Every single part of the system that's set up to protect children has totally failed. And we find that the whistleblowers are just shoved into a corner. Hillsborough Law, what have the government done? They made a great big stand. It's coming in. It isn't. The duty of candour is still not in. And the people at Hillsborough Law and the people at Inquest last week were saying we need whistleblowers to be protected too, because even they accept that their work is not going to succeed unless we protect the people who speak out.
But this is the problem with successive governments, isn't it? They're all full of hot air. They promise things until you've sort of left the room. And as soon as you've left the room, they kind of move on to something else. And they go, we'll bother about that again when they come back and knock on the door again. And it must be endlessly frustrating.
Well, they don't even do that. I met with Justin Madders about 3 weeks ago. He hadn't even read the briefing, and he sort of smirked continually through it and dismissed it, saying, but you've got trade unions. Well, let's see all the children go and see a trade unionist. They haven't got any solutions. The last government pretended they did, and they supported this, except they didn't want to do it because they didn't want MPs and senior civil servants to be held to account. If you've got nothing to hide, you're happy to be held to account. Look at all the police officers like Pete Jackson, who are put through years and years of pain in an employment tribunal. Every single time they open their mouth, they talk about the vulnerable child they saw being taken into a known place that rapes children. And nobody's looked at any of that. It's all been denied over and over again. The work that Maggie Oliver is doing is absolutely essential. The work that the Director of Safeguarding at Whistleblower UK does, that's Jane Senior. Jane's, we've all been arrested. We've all been threatened with policing. It's like the social media catastrophe that's going on. People who speak up in this country, I think social media is a really good example, about anything, are now subject to the police coming around to arrest them.
Well, it's as though the police are more concerned with people who have been critical of something that's happened than they are of the thing itself. The fact that more people have now been locked up from the Southport situation over the riots than there have been in the grooming scandals. It just seems a completely upside-down situation.
It is, and that's why we need the Office of the Whistleblower, because that's going to turn it on its head. It shouldn't be about the person speaking up. It should be about the victims. We have to put the victims first, and we have to make the state machinery, or give the state machinery the tools it needs to do the job, because quite clearly at the moment it doesn't have those tools. If all of these inquiries are coming in and you see 3 or 4 about child abuse in a certain area, it's going to be obvious that the Office of the Whistleblower will send in the police immediately and send in other authorities, the people with the power. Whistleblowers are the informed insiders inside all of this. Everyone knows what's going on. Look at Jimmy Savile and the BBC. It goes on and on and on. How many more scandals is the government prepared to allow to happen without bringing forward legislation that makes sense. This isn't a cost, it's a cost saving. We stop people being injured. We don't then have to pay all of those tens of thousands of pounds afterwards. And look at the criminal justice system. On the odd occasion, like with Jane Senior, where she brought forward all of that evidence and had to fight for it to be dealt with, how many years did it take before anyone went to jail? And thousands and thousands of children. No, it's absolutely not good enough. So we're going to keep banging on, and we're hoping that that Gareth Snell will be true to his word. He will take forward this bill on the 25th of April this year. And if it doesn't go forward because of assisted dying, that he then puts it back in the list along with many other MPs, including the amazing Tessa Munt, who is championing this, Baroness Kramer, who's championing this, and many others. It's when you become a front bencher that people get amnesia, isn't it?
Yes, that seems to be the trouble, absolutely. Georgina, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Wish you well with all of it. Georgina Halford-Hall, CEO of Whistleblowers UK, quite rightly saying that, you know, the trouble with politicians is they talk a good game and then they don't do anything. And that's the problem. Steve says this, my 90-year-old father-in-law was taken into hospital at the weekend and left in a cubicle for 9 hours, and we had to take turns trying to interpret questions and comments to him from the agency staff because he simply couldn't understand them. In moving him, they ripped his elbow open and lost his medication, his phone charger, £12 million in a new emergency department, but it's filled with rubbish staff. The NHS is broken, says Steve. And Paul from Great Yarmouth says this, so we import coal when we have millions of tonnes under our feet, so dig it up, creating thousands of jobs. And we have a liar in charge of British Steel. We are truly doomed if this doesn't change. At least Ian Duncan Smith is clued up about this mess and the Chinese infiltration of this country. And Margaret, currently in Tunisia, says, why the hell are we getting the army involved in Birmingham? Just sack the ones that are on strike. We could try that. Trevor in Harrow says, trouble is, of course, Angela Rayner's given them more rights. So you can't sack them. At the same time as telling them they have to go back to work. So she's a bit stymied there, isn't she? Trevor in Harrow says, when are we going to realise that the establishment are letting in these illegal migrants on purpose? They have no intention of stopping it. Those who think they will stop it are just as deluded as those who think they're all fleeing a war zone. Yeah, exactly right. Last time we checked, they were playing football in the war zone. Do you remember? On the north coast of France there, just before they got in another dinghy. Let's have a voice note from Brian.
Morning, Mike. Brighton Southend, Monday morning. I honestly thought that now Parliament's in recess for the Easter weekend or the Easter holidays, we wouldn't have so much rubbish to come into, but boy, was I wrong. What is this government and the police up to, hey? We can't even speak English now in England, our native tongue, for fear of it being classed a hate crime. You know, who on earth is passing these stupid, ridiculous laws?
Welcome to the only place where common sense is spoken, because you might think that because the government isn't actually in charge at the moment, or they're not sitting in Parliament at the moment, that somehow there's a problem with getting stories out of the government. Well, you won't have any problem here, because here we're keeping a very close eye on them. And here's what they got up to at the weekend. This is something that came across the desk first thing this morning. This is in Wisbeach, right? There's a couple of, you know, what you might call electoral events going on for the local elections, which are coming up on May the 1st. And somebody reported somebody else to the police because of something they said.
The other issue we've had reported, and this is a bit I need to speak to you about, is that, and I understand you've got a load of witnesses, and I don't know what's been filmed, so you may have filmed some of this interaction with the mayor. No? Because if you do, that would be really handy for us, but apparently during some conversations between yourself, apparently you have alleged, and we weren't here, so I don't know you've said it, but you've alleged to say, speak English, or words to that effect?
Speak clearly.
Speak clearly.
No,
okay.
The gentleman's partially deaf.
Yeah, he can speak clearly. Yeah.
So I couldn't even hear him.
No, and that's fine, and that's why we've just come to speak, because potentially someone could perceive that as a hate crime.
Someone could perceive that as a hate crime. That is, of course, asking someone to either speak more clearly or indeed speak English. Unbelievable stuff. Joanna from Salisbury, can you imagine how angry a seasoned police officer feels, having had to work hard to get qualifications to get into police, only to tell possible new recruits you don't need them? Yeah, well, that's what they're doing at Greater Manchester Police. Unbelievable stuff. 7:48.
What I would wonder is how you can argue that Hamas isn't a terrorist organisation if the definition is so broad.
Well, by that logic, Israel's a terrorist organisation. Do you agree?
No.
Well, think about it. Come on, man, think it through. If you agree the definition is very, very broad, then the Secretary of State could say, right, clearly it applies to Israel.
But you said it about Hamas,
they're doing a genocide.
But you're arguing the counter
to
this.
Violent. I'm going to say that the IDF is a terrorist organisation. She could do that if she wanted. She literally could. But why shouldn't she? They're doing a genocide.
Why shouldn't she? It's not a genocide. It is factually not a genocide.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:51. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until, of course, 10 o'clock when Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here. It's come out, by the way, that Ed Miliband, Red Ed, as he used to be known, is now going to be called Jet Ed because he spent a bucket load of money flying around the world in all sorts of different planes. 70,000 quid's worth of flights he's taken compared to 6,000 which were taken by his predecessor in the last government. We'll get into that story in a little bit more detail coming up in a moment. But John, first up from with a voice note on British Steel.
Morning, Mike. Great show. John here from Derbyshire. How can this ridiculously stupid and incompetent government not see what the Chinese are playing at here? They're clearly, to leave the mills open and shut the blast furnaces is just to open up the door for them importing steel. I mean, you have to be as thick as a whale omelette to not realise what their game is. Yeah, we're just so incredibly stupid and naive.
Well, you'd like to think that the government would be able to see the things that you and I can see, John, but sadly they don't seem to be able to. Most of this stuff is pretty straightforward and obvious, isn't it? Let's talk to Henry Bolton, ABE, international border expert, of course, on the news that 656 illegal migrants crossed the Channel in one day on Friday, and of course all helped along by Border Force, who it says in the Times this morning have been sent on taxpayer-funded dog massage courses. I mean, no wonder they can't protect the border. They're too busy stroking their border collies, for heaven's sake. Henry Bolton's here. Henry, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning. Thanks for that. I haven't seen that. I didn't need that this morning.
No, I know. Incredible. We've now got apparently just 300 migrants to go, and I was told this by one of our very loyal and very sharp-eyed viewers this morning, until there's been as many migrants coming in this year as there have been under Labour as there were under Rishi Sunak for an entire year.
Well, I haven't done that bit of mathematics, Mike, but for sure this is for the first 4 months of the year. This is a record figure that we've got this year. So however way you cut it, Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper, and so on, whatever you're doing is not having an impact. It is not reducing the flow of boats. So whatever you're doing is simply not good enough.
It's increasing it. It seems to be increasing.
That's the effect. I mean, I'm trying to be a little bit generous here because there are other things going on as well. Because there are more people, or last year, the end of the summer last year, more people coming across the Mediterranean. And as I've said many times, there's a lot of those people are on their way to the North French coast. It takes them a bit of time to get through. So some of the things that affect, the southern flank of Europe, then later on have an impact back here. So I'm not saying that the British government has caused that increase in pull, but, and this is the crucial piece, surely, isn't it, Mike? And you just said it, we can all see it. Why can't the government see it? It is the fact that we make the United Kingdom an easy and good destination for these people. It is that fact that results in them coming here. We make it easier in the United Kingdom for people to settle, not just come in here and settle in the short term, but the longer term. We make it easier for them to bring their family.
Yeah.
We make it easier for them to work off the sort of official sort of job market, if you like. So everything that we do, through its failure to sort of look after the UK interests, is encouraging these people to come.
Well,
and the
that's
British
quite
government
right.
hasn't addressed any of that.
No.
The only way to do this is to detain these people the moment they arrive, detain them securely until such time as we can remove them, deport them, or if, for example, they're Syrian or Afghan and legally it's very difficult to take them back, then we keep them here, detained securely until they want to go back. And they're going nowhere until they go back. Do you see what I mean? They don't go out.
Well, this is one of the things that Donald Trump's doing, and he's basically made what I think is a very good decision, where he said to people, look, you know, there will be lots of people who will self-deport, if you like, because he said, we'll go to them and we'll make them an offer, which will be, if you want to come back to this country and live here legally, you have to go home to where you came from, and you have to make a legal application. If you do not do that, and we have to deport you because you refuse to do that, then you will never be allowed to come back into this country. And that seems to me to be a pretty good way of getting rid of people.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Mike. But, you know, you used the phrase, I think you were quoting maybe somebody else a little bit earlier on, just before the break, I think. And you said the politicians talk the right talk, but they don't seem to actually do anything.
No.
And the problem is now, you know, and it's not just in this arena, it's, you know, in my work sort of around the world, I've seen the United Nations and the European Union and all sorts of NGOs and charities and God knows who, governments, trying to do things. They go out there and think, we should be doing this. But there are very few people in this world, Mike, who have the skill to be able to translate intention through to effect.
Yeah.
There's a massive, massive piece of very difficult work that has to be done to change just words into positive change on the ground. And we just don't have them in government because such people demand hard work from ministers, from senior civil servants, and they just can't intellectually cope with it. The other thing is, the gentleman you showed earlier, the police officer earlier, who was, you know, pulling people up for asking somebody else to speak English or speak clearly. Remember that police officer is following policy direction that comes from the same ministry that is responsible for securing our borders. There's a fundamental cultural problem within the Home Office. Yeah. Throughout the Home Office, all branches of it. And you see it very visibly in that example in Wisbech, but you know, we've got the same sort of problem taking place on our borders. We've got Border Force, which got some tremendously good people within it, doing this job in a policy framework that ties one arm behind their backs.
Yeah, but we also know, Henry, that the Border Force Union last year or the year before was involved in a lawsuit against the government, against the Tory government, because of the way that they were operating their immigration policy. So we can see whether or not, you know, the Border Force individual operatives think differently, that they don't believe in the policy which the government is supposedly trying to carry out, which is not to help these people to come in, but is to now discourage them from coming. So, you know, and then we learned this morning, as I say, it's in the Sun, the Home Office forked out a few £1,000 for handlers to learn to relax the muscles of their drug sniffer hounds. Now, that may well be an important thing, but it doesn't seem to me to be the most important thing if you're being overrun with hundreds and hundreds of migrants coming here every single day.
Well, I don't think would we mind, Mike, if they were doing this sort of thing, which, as you say, I mean, you know, the sniffer dogs and so on do require, you know, they've got to be very fit, very healthy. And so, you know, perhaps, you know, indeed, I'm not an animal expert, but perhaps it does help their efficiency. But in the context,
I think I'd rather
where
a few
the
attack
nation
dogs,
is so
to be honest,
appalled,
rather than sniffer dogs.
Well, in the context that the nation is so appalled, worried, fearful even of what's happening in terms of the boat crossings, and they're just increasing. You know, in that context, such stories take on an importance that really they perhaps shouldn't. But in that context, we're all pulling our hair out, and I don't have that much of it to pull out.
I can see that's what you've been doing for years. Now, listen, Henry, we've got to run. Listen, I'm sorry to rush you, but we've got to go. The news is next. Coming up, Will Kingston's going to join us, and we've got lots more for you.
how much, ladies and gentlemen, are fish and chips where you come from? We'll go to Jason in Crewe.
Jason from Crewe, fish, chips and peas, £7.50. It's the best chippy in England.
Janice in Leeds, go.
Regarding fish and chips in Leeds, it's between £9.50 and £12.75.
Whitby, how much is fish and chips?
3 of us, fish, chips, peas, I think one of us curry sauce, 3 cans of pop, just short of 70 quid.
£70? That's 23 quid a head, man. Even my maths does that. Very quickly, a voice note. Campbell in Scotland, go.
Up here in Banff in the northeast of Scotland, we can get a fillet and a half of haddock with a regular chips for £8 and 10p, and it's by far and away one of the best chippies I've ever had.
Kenneth in Surrey, fish and chips, go.
Fish and chips in Ascot, about half a mile from where you used to live, will cost you £12.60. Great show. Keep up the good work.
That's why I moved, because you were living there. When was the last time you had fish and chips?
Couple of weeks ago.
How much? Where'd you get it from?
I think it was about 40 quid. It was in the Ivy.
Honestly, you really are. For any of you who think he's a man of the people, I nearly said you're a...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, coming up to 3 minutes past 8. The sun is upon us, the sun is up, the day is upon us, the week is upon us, believe it or not. Monday the 14th of April, ladies and gentlemen. We are edging ever closer to Bank Holiday weekend, which of course is coming. Good Friday is coming on Friday. I wonder if we'll get any Easter messaging from Keir Starmer, who seems obsessed with giving out religious messaging to all and sundry, as long as you don't have to be a Christian, I'm afraid. It was Palm Sunday yesterday. He made sure he put out a tweet about how proud he was of the Sikh connections in this country and all that the Sikh community does for the UK. All very well and good. Nothing wrong with that. But why doesn't he ever do anything about Christian holidays? He just doesn't seem to be interested in it whatsoever. Coming up in this hour, Will Kingston's going to join us. We'll also talk to Mike Neville, retired Scotland Yard detective, and Gráinne Hallahan about what's going on in our schools. Harry Cole, political editor of The Sun, with a big column today on British Steel, will also be talking to us. British Steel is a mess. It's a mess of the making of more than one government. First of all, the Conservatives sold it off to the Chinese, and now the Labour government have made it almost impossible to produce steel in this country of a good quality that we can actually use to build military hardware, which includes jets, which includes tanks, which includes ships. And without it, quite frankly, we are lesser of a nation. And I'm afraid that's kind of where they are taking us. Also, big story on the migrants this morning. 656 migrants came to this country alone on one day on Friday. Yet another record broken by Stop the Boat Starmer, who's clearly not stopping the boats. But one of the reasons why perhaps they're not stopping the boats in quite such numbers as they should is because Border Force have been taking lessons in how to stroke their own dogs. Have a listen to this from Rob.
Mike, Rob from Dorset here. I think you need to rename that dog breed, mate. Should be called the No Border Collie. Great show, mate.
The No Border Collie, or the Border Free Collie, because you don't have any borders. You know, we just don't bother with them anymore. Also, Tulip Sadiq, she's under investigation, and now a warrant has been issued for her arrest by the Bangladeshi authorities on charge of corruption. Let's not forget, she used to be the anti-corruption minister, and she's one of Keir Starmer's best friends in politics. My goodness me. The NHS, meanwhile, are placing non-whites at the front of the queue for all sorts of things. We'll get into that story. The Greater Manchester Police have been staggering around the streets of the city, approaching members of ethnic minorities and saying, do you fancy joining the cops? Don't have to have any qualifications, don't worry about that. And of course, we're going to be finding out about what else is going on in Birmingham. The army are being brought in by Angela Rayner to sort out the bin strike, but they're not actually going to be picking up any rubbish. They're just going to be giving advice, possibly working from home. Goodness gracious me. It's 5 minutes past 8. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. There's one from Damon in Wigan. This country is now racist towards its own people, he said, and it's blatantly being done by the government, who are making it OK for everyone except white British people to be racist. No hope, no future, no respect for Brits. And one here from Teresa, who says, Mike, I finally feel a bit sorry for Jonathan Reynolds. What with running British Steel and revising for his bar exams, we should cut him some slack. I know. Do you know, he used to be a solicitor. Let's see what he said in 2014 when he was a Member of Parliament.
Before the last election, I worked as a solicitor in Manchester city centre, and I would travel in to Manchester every day from what is now my constituency.
Yes, and then this year he corrected it.
I made a reference to my experience of using our local transport system in Greater Manchester when I worked as a solicitor in Manchester city centre. I should have made clear that specifically, Madam Deputy Speaker, that was a reference at the time to being a trainee solicitor. I would like to formally correct the record.
Yes. I should have said that when I said I was a solicitor, that was a complete and utter pack of lies, because I wasn't. That would have been better, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that have been more truthful? Instead of saying, I'd just like to make a clarification that when I said I was a solicitor, I was actually a trainee solicitor. No, you weren't a trainee solicitor. You were not a solicitor. That is the difference between telling the truth and telling a load of lies. Anyway, now Jonathan Reynolds is running British Steel, I'm sorry to say. Will Kingston's here, political commentator. Hard to believe, Will. Very good morning to you.
G'day, Mike. Geez, Labor MPs love inflating a CV, don't they?
They really do. But I mean, now it's starting to get dangerous. I mean, what's next? Are we going to get Rachel Reeves getting put in charge of NASA? You know, and they'll go, you know, yeah, you'll be able to do that. It's fine, no problem at all.
Well, maybe we could chuck her on the next flight to the moon and then be rid of her. That could actually be a good result.
Yeah. Well, I mean, next time Katy Perry's going up there.
Yeah, I saw that, and Bezos's wife at the same time. Yeah, I thought that was an odd one. But look, integrity matters in politics. We know this, and the Labor Party sadly shows a fundamental deficit of integrity when they do this sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, we were looking at the weekend. Jonathan Reynolds talks about saving British Steel. But have a look at what he said to Laura Kunsberg yesterday on the BBC when he was actually asked about the future and whether it's going to be possible to even run the blast furnaces because they haven't got any fuel.
Taxpayers are now on the hook. So I'll ask you again, are you sure that you will have the supplies that you need to keep the furnaces burning?
I'm not going to get into the specifics of that for some very important reasons.
That's the central question, Secretary.
It is, but giving us the chance to do that was essential, and I'm not going to make my situation or the nation's situation more difficult by sharing some specific commercial aspects of that. But what we have done, with the support of parliamentary colleagues, I hugely appreciate the presence in Parliament yesterday of so many colleagues to do that, was essential to maintaining steel production in the UK and giving us a chance for that transition to the future, which we need. I said in Parliament yesterday, it's not a magic wand, it's not a panacea, but without the decisive action by the government yesterday, all was lost.
Yeah, well, all might be lost anyway. I mean, he could have just said no, couldn't he, to the answer to that question. I don't know if we're going to be able to safeguard the future of British Steel, because he doesn't.
Yeah, but the other thing, and we're going to get to Southport in a moment, there's a thread that runs through these stories, and it is they don't trust you with information. They don't trust you. They think you are idiots. They think that you will then react in a particular way, which means that, therefore, we need to keep things from you. It is a theme that runs through this government. But the other thing is, he doesn't have much to say, because the fact of the matter is that steel production is one of the most energy-intensive industries known to man, and you can't do it when the country's energy is twice as expensive as Europe or the United States because of our ridiculous net zero policies. Like, this is not a particularly complicated thing to understand, but unfortunately, because they've backed themselves into a corner on net zero, they now have to obfuscate and say silly things, which even the most, even the most layman observer can see through.
Absolutely right, and that is always going to be their problem. Yeah, let's move on to, not just to Southport, but also to what happened over the weekend in a prison, which is currently holding the brother of the dead Manchester Arena bomber, who was able to, believe it or not, despite the fact that he's been sentenced to 55 years in jail, have access to a kitchen where he could make weapons and where he could boil oil, basically, or boil butter and make it into oil, so he could throw it on some prison guards. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
There are two interconnected problems here, and they both come back to that scourge of identity politics that has infested our institutions, Mike. The first is it has now become apparent that Islamists are being appeased in our prisons and that Islamism is on the rise in the prison system. And I believe that appeasement, at least in part, would come from that old thing that says we're just too afraid of being called racist if we're a police officer, or if we're a prison officer, or if we're part of the prison hierarchy. And we've seen this story play out so many times. And the second thing is we know that our prisons are overcrowded and we know they're at breaking point. And in part, that is because we are locking people up for tweets and for non-crimes, and we're not actually focusing on the fundamentals, which should be keeping prison officers safe from genuinely dangerous people. You put those two things together, and these sorts of things are bound to happen.
Yeah, well, this is the problem. HMP Frankland in Durham, where this guy should not be really given anything other than a cell in which he isn't allowed to leave. You know, the idea that he's allowed to cook for himself, he's allowed to stab, you know, the two prison officers who are currently in quite critical life-threatening condition. They seem to be stable, but, you know, they won't be the same after this. He threw boiling butter over a female prison guard. Why there's a female prison guard there is another question that I would be asking. Robert Jenrick is saying, you know, surely this should now be a watershed moment for how we treat extremists in prison. And he's right, because he's the guy that's pointed out that an awful lot of these prisons are now also under the sort of the pin, if you like, under the thumb of Muslim jihadist gangs.
Yeah, well, I've also been following this quite closely on social media, and it has raised the spectre of the death penalty once again, and I can completely understand why. One of the big problems, and this is actually something which is difficult for any prison to solve, is when a guy knows he's going to be in jail for the rest of his life with no possibility of parole, then there's no real disincentive not to do this sort of atrocious stuff. So I think it's completely understandable that some people are saying, well, in order to save the lives of people who work in the prison system, something like the death penalty may be an appropriate deterrent in the future. I have mixed feelings on it, but I can completely understand why that conversation is taking place.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you hear it a lot from people that watch and listen to this show, but I mean, I'm not particularly in favour of that, but what I would be in favour of doing is putting somebody in a very unpleasant cell and just leaving them there until they rot, you know, and they should not be given any rights, they should not be allowed out for exercise, you know, all sorts of things that they can currently now do, they should not be allowed to do.
Yep, no, I have nothing to add to that. I agree entirely.
And the same would go for this absolute scumbag who committed those awful murders in Southport. But an interesting report out, Commons Home Affairs Committee, coming out today in the Telegraph, saying basically that the police got it wrong when they were silent because they actually caused the atmosphere which made the riots worse.
Yeah, well, again, I go back to what I said before in that there is this sense amongst our elite classes, particularly in the judiciary and the policing system, that the public are not to be trusted with information. And this is another example. But there is a caveat here, and everyone will note that when there is a white working class man that is being accused of a crime, it seems that their faces are splashed over social media very quickly, often from those police Twitter accounts that seem to take this sort of glee in locking up white working class men for crimes that they see as being against the multicultural order of modern Britain.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that really annoys people is maybe the prosecution did do what they needed to do by the letter of the law. I don't know. But it is that feeling in the pit of your stomach, which I know many viewers and many listeners would have, which is if this was someone of a different ethnicity, they would have been treated differently. It is the fundamental problem with justice in this country today.
Yeah, absolutely right. Let's talk about Tulip Siddiq. She's all over the papers this morning because she's now facing an arrest warrant in Bangladesh over claims of corruption, which is kind of ironic given that she was appointed to be the Minister against corruption in this particular Labour government. She's a very, very close friend of Keir Starmer. Some people say she's his closest political friend and ally. It took a long time to get her out of the cabinet, you know, because the allegations about her and her crooked auntie, and I don't think there's any problem calling her that, who used to run Bangladesh and siphoned off quite a bit of money. It took them about 8 weeks before Starmer realised that she'd have to resign. And even in his kind of acceptance of her resignation, he was more or less saying, we'll see you soon, I'm sure you won't be away for long. But it now looks like she's got some pretty serious questions to answer in Bangladesh.
Yeah, I'm a tad torn because Bangladesh is a corrupt country and I wouldn't put it past their anti-corruption commission to be corrupt. So I'm not going to purely rely on what they've said as gospel. At the same time, another part of me said, where there's smoke, there's fire. But whatever may be the case, this is a terrible look for the Labor government. You should never have put someone in as a corruption minister when there is even the faintest hint that there may be corruption problems related to him or her. So I think it does show a lack of judgment from Starmer. And it also shows this tendency that he has to be incredibly obdurate, in that it's obvious from the get-go that this was not going to be a tenable position for her, and it's obvious he needed to cut her loose. But he has this tendency just to be pig-headed and not listen and not respond to the mood of the moment, which again is because I think he is a robot and he doesn't have any sort of people skills or empathy to be able to judge the mood in the way that the great politicians of the past were able to. So this is a lack of judgment story for me on the part of Starmer.
Yeah, well, he also has quite a few lacks of judgment, doesn't he? I mean, he had a lack of judgment when he appointed Louise Haigh to be Transport Secretary. As it turned out, she had a conviction for fraud, which either he didn't know about or she didn't tell him about, but either way, he should have done. He then had the problem with that guy who had to resign because of some WhatsApp references that he made to pensioners dying, which was another one that he lost. He's had Tulip Siddiq. He's had all manner of problems with various cabinet ministers that he's appointed, and he's now got a Secretary of State for Trade and Industry who has been proven to be a liar, who said he was a solicitor when he wasn't. He's got Rachel Reeves, who faked a CV, you know, had sort of nicked somebody else's book and pretended it was her own, you know, called herself a chess champion, called herself an economist. You know, the list goes on of all of these people he's appointed to positions of quite powerful kind of influence, who are not quite what they say they are.
And the thing is that these stories hit harder against Labor than they would against, let's say, a Conservative government led by someone like Boris Johnson, who we know is a bit of a rogue and a mountebank. The only thing Starmer has that comprises his brand is, I follow the rules. I am an international human rights lawyer. And so when you see examples of people so flagrantly not following the rules, it makes him look like a hypocrite. And that is the one thing that people cannot tolerate in their politicians more than anything else. They can tolerate mistakes. They can even tolerate poor behaviour, but hypocrisy annoys people immensely. And what this just creates the perception of is a government that is trying to moralise, trying to clutch at pearls and virtue signal, whilst they themselves act in the wrong way. And that's something that really, really annoys people.
It does. And I'll tell you what's been annoying people this morning, as well as a story on the front page of the Telegraph. NHS Trust discriminates against white job applicants by manipulating interview shortlists in favour of black and ethnic minority candidates. I mean, we've seen this in the police in the last week. We've seen it in the RAF before. You know, everybody knows it's wrong, and yet they're still doing it.
Yeah, I just find this so incredibly depressing because, you know, some people say, well, we're past peak woke, we're done with this nonsense. And then you realise that the institutions of the United Kingdom, and indeed many of the institutions across Europe and Australia, I think the US is now finally back on the right track, but many of the institutions are so infested with this ideology that it's going to be incredibly difficult to rip out. And it starts well before that, I think, in our education sector, where every kid who's coming out with some sort of a degree has been brainwashed for 3-4 years. In fact, if you go back to schools, even longer, with this identity politics nonsense. And so I think if you want to sort this stuff out, you need to target the institutions, but I think you also need to start with the education system the next time that either Reform or the Conservatives get in government, to say, we're not going to stop this stuff in the judiciary or in, you know, Whitehall until we actually say what are kids learning in schools and then taking into their job.
Absolutely right. Will, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Will Kingston, political commentator there, coming up to 20 minutes past 8. So once again, says Mick in Wallington, police chief's got it wrong after Southport. Anybody sacked? No. I mean, I think there is the chief of the police in Liverpool, I think, is moving on. And it's one of those kind of, you know, probably just do it quietly when nobody's really noticing, and then suddenly everyone will think that we didn't admit to doing anything that we shouldn't have done. But in fact, I think it's very clear that Merseyside police screwed up massively, and they will probably feel the full force of Keir Starmer. No, I'm just kidding. They won't. Lynn Tooting says, morning, Mike. I seem to remember that Jonathan Reynolds said that he wanted to be an MP because it offered a better work-life balance than being a solicitor. I wonder how he feels about that now after working on a Saturday. I mean, the amount of fuss that they made about coming into work on a Saturday, you would have thought, you know, they'd had to traverse Everest to get here or something. Absolutely ridiculous. Brian in Westcliff says, Mike, Keir Starmer's decision to celebrate Muslim and Sikh religious occasions while ignoring Easter is a calculated move to shore up ethnic voting blocks. Oh, and he's hemorrhaging Christian voters. Well, I'll tell you what, he's also hemorrhaging. There's a story in The Guardian today saying there's about 80 Labour seats which are likely to be at risk because of the fact that there are places like red wall seats in parts of Britain where the majority that those Labour MPs have is smaller than the number of people who are likely to lose their PIP benefits, which means that if they all vote against Labour, which they probably will, well, you know what? They might just not be able to hold on to the seats. Absolutely incredible. Morning, Mike. As a Christian, this week is Holy Week for us, starting yesterday on Palm Sunday. This is the most important week of the year for us, yet I'm not aware of any mention from Secure at all. Kemi did acknowledge it. Well, you know, I don't really mind whether politicians want to get involved in religion. If they don't wish to get involved because they don't feel particularly religious, which I don't think Keir Starmer is, then that's also fine. But what I find completely and utterly unacceptable and hypocritical is to celebrate and to sort of perfunctorily recognise certain religious holidays and not all of them. Because if you do some of them, you've got to do all of them. And that's how the world works. And if you don't do all of them, you will be perceived to be biased in some way, shape or form. And Keir Starmer comes across right now as biased against Christian people. And it's not about colour. There are plenty of people of colour who are Christians. But he doesn't seem to want to ever do anything about Christian holidays. Easter, for example. Why not? Why has he not mentioned it? Why doesn't he mention Lent? I've no idea. This is Morning Glory.
Members of a grooming gang who preyed on teenage girls, they got £611,000 in legal aid. This is the Rotherham monsters, as they call them. This comes days after Labour went back on the abuse inquiry promises. Ringleader Mohammed Imran Ali Akhtar, 43, who was sentenced to 23 years in jail, got $143,000 in legal aid. His total doesn't include costs for a separate trial last year where he got a 12-year term for raping a girl of 13 after plying her with booze and drugs.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through, of course, until 10 o'clock. It's 8:25. We've got plenty to talk about. Our police, prison service and judiciary have been taken over by an ideology and have abandoned public service, common sense and safety. Making the same mistakes over and over again is lunacy, says Mick. And well, we've got another little clip for you today to play for something that happened over the weekend. Check this out. This is a guy who actually is operating what you might describe in the old-fashioned terms as a mobile disco in the back of a black cab, playing some fairly loud music out the back of it in the streets of central London. Check it out. And as you see, the people out there on the streets of London quite enjoying it. Suddenly some police arrive, right? Not one police officer, not two, not three police officers, not four police officers, not five, not six, not seven, not eight. No, I'm afraid it was 12 police officers turned up to tell him that he had to turn the music down, even though he was out on the streets where people seemed to be quite enjoying it, and it wasn't as if it was so late at night that everybody was asleep. And have a look at the second clip now.
Now, when you want a police officer down when there's any street crime, you can't get one. You play some music, and you've got how many officers? Look, right? You count the officers behind me for a bit of music on a Shoreditch. Okay, you've got more officers here, right? For now, you've got 12 officers, right? And they say there's no police around to do anything. But you've got 12 officers to come down for us. It don't seem right, guys. You know, it doesn't seem right. You know, put that on the socials, because this is unbelievable for a bit of music. It does seem a bit extreme, guys.
And there's a van as well. And I'm not sure, we'll find out what the end result of all that was. And I presume that he wasn't charged because he wasn't necessarily committing any crime. He may well have been said to be a nuisance, but in Shoreditch on a Friday night where thousands of people are out and about enjoying themselves at the early hours of the morning, really? I don't think so. There is, of course, the other thing that the police do, which is come around knocking on your door if you've said anything that might be upsetting to any school leaders. That's, of course, what happened to Maxie Allen, the Times radio producer. And we spoke to him, was it last week or the week before? Let's speak now, though, to Gráinne Hallahan, education journalist, because things have got so tetchy and bad, apparently, in terms of WhatsApp groups, in terms of schools, in terms of teachers, in terms of parents, and what things are being said, that lawyers have started to get involved. It's quite extraordinary. Gráinne, very good morning to you.
Hello, good morning.
Hello, how you doing? This is an extraordinary story, isn't it? That schools now are having to talk to lawyers to see whether they need to sort of structure some form of rule framework for parents to talk about how their schools are being run and how their children are feeling.
It's really quite difficult, and I think it speaks to a difficulty that schools have, not in just trying to work with the parents in their schools, but also trying to, how are you going to try and control those WhatsApp groups? You can ask parents to conduct themselves in a particular way. You can set rules, and you can say that, you know, we don't want to have these sorts of groups because it's causing problems, but you can't really stop people from having conversations and talking to each other. And the issues that we have really stem from the relationship between the school and the parents in the first place. And if you can't address that, then the groups are always going to be there in some sort of form. That's the symptom, right? The actual issue is the relationship between home and school. So it's, you know, lawyers might get involved, you might have rules, you might have codes of conduct, but really the heart of this issue is that relationship between home and school.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I can't quite understand sometimes how we get to these places, because to me, WhatsApp groups are a little bit like what used to be called standing around and chatting in the pub, you know, whereby people are making their views known. Maybe some of them might be a little bit unpalatable. Some people might be a little bit rude. Some people might get a little bit worked up. But it doesn't seem to me that you need the police involved or lawyers involved or you know, anybody to give you a sort of, this is what you can say, this is what you can't say, in case you upset somebody.
I think that's such a great comparison, because I think that's exactly it. Maybe not necessarily when we're talking about parents, talking about schools, that the pub was the location of these conversations, but they were very often in the playground. But when you have a group of parents together chatting about things in the school, when you're speaking to people face to face, you're far more likely to be able to read people's reactions. There's a lot of that goes on with just body language.
Yeah.
And if you're saying something and people are reacting quite, you know, it's obvious that you're saying something that's out of line and you shouldn't have said it. Where it's written down in a WhatsApp group and people can screenshot it and share it, and you're sort of throwing things out into a blank abyss, and people might react, but they might not feel that they want to react on a WhatsApp group, because then their reactions are being shown to others, right?
Yeah.
It was much better when these conversations took place face to face. I think parents were more able to help each other and give advice. When it's WhatsApp groups, people can say things that they might not necessarily say to people's faces, might get themselves a bit het up, a bit worked up, and go into a bit of a rant. They're dangerous places, really, when you think about it. And bring back the chats in the playground. I think parents, a time when parents were more helpful to other parents and working together with the school, that's a better place to be for schools and parents, rather than angry WhatsApp groups of people getting themselves riled up and angry about things, when a face-to-face conversation is usually the better answer.
Yes, but I suppose we're not talking here about groups of WhatsApp users who include the school as well as parents. It's more likely to be parental groups sort of off to the side. So, I mean, in a way, as maybe as troublesome as they might be, and as you say, you'd be stupid to write something down that you thought might come back and bite you on the backside. But you know, it seems to me that the school have no business telling people what they can and can't do outside of the school, whether it's got anything to do with what they think of the school. Surely I hope we still live in a free country.
And I think you run the risk of really upsetting parents by imposing these rules and further damaging that relationship between home and school. Parents who might be very reasonable might think that, you know, they want to use the WhatsApp group, but I wouldn't say anything rude in it, and then being told you can't have this and you can't have that. That's fractious, isn't it? That damages a relationship, because they're made to feel like they're another student. Like we're all glad to put our school years behind us and not have teachers telling us what to do anymore. And as a parent, when you've got a school saying to you, you can't do this and you can't do that, it might upset you further. So it's a really tricky thing for schools to have to do. I can see the reasons why they want to control WhatsApp groups and trying to temper what's being said in them and trying to make, you know, communications between home and school and parents and things better. But even by having these rules, you can really upset parents just by them existing. So it feels like a no-win situation, that this is going to make nobody happy. And really, like I said at the start, the answer is better home-school relationships, so that we don't have unpleasant conversations being taken place between parents that might cause problems.
Yes, no, I think that's absolutely right. Gráinne, thank you very much indeed. Gráinne Hallahan there, education journalist, on this mad story that lawyers are now getting involved. Schools are actually asking lawyers to draft kind of frameworks for conversations that they can have around parental problems with how the schools are dealing with their children. I mean, it really has gone ridiculously bonkers. Calling the police on parents, getting lawyers in, all of which, of course, cost a bucket load of money. It's never a good idea to consult a lawyer in most cases, because it will just cost you a bucket load of money and it won't resolve anything. And if anything, it might make the people that you are having a problem with even more adversarial. Brian from Troon says any MP that didn't turn up on Saturday should be sacked. Excellent. And Warwick says from Devon, superb show as ever. How can anyone believe Reynolds on anything he now says, given that he lied through his teeth about being a solicitor? He had no credibility at all. And on the subject of prisons and that terrible story at the weekend of the Abedi brother, the one who didn't blow himself up in the Manchester Arena but did help to plan it, serving 55 years in a prison up in the northeast of England, throwing hot burning butter over a female prison guard and stabbing 2 other prison guards because he was allowed access to a kitchen where he could make weapons and cook hot oil. Brilliant. Absolutely incredible. Woke prison, says Tim, thinking a terrorist will change in the prison. Prisoners think it's nothing more than a holiday. And Bill in Cheshire says, and the death penalty, yes please. It won't bring back the victims, but it will give the vast majority of the population some belief that there is actually a consequence for the acts of these vile people. And it certainly would prevent anything from being done again by any of those individuals. I just think I'm not that comfortable with the state killing people. But I'd be happy to lock him up in a box for the rest of the time. 8:35.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 8:38. Coming up, Harry Cole from The Sun will be here. He's coming to the studio, I think, this morning. He's written a column about British Steel and where we go from here. Probably down the gurgler, I should imagine. It is, of course, the place for common sense. Let's get a voice note from Ian on the loud music.
Morning, Mike. Ian from Hemel Hempstead. With regard to the taxi playing the music, if you go up, particularly on a weekend, up Oxford Circus, anywhere around there, you'll find those abominations of free-wheeled cycles that are, you can jump in and pay about £60 to go 100 yards for.
Oh, yeah.
They blurt out music. They've got lights flowing everywhere with them, and they're all over the place. They all play loud music as they're going along the street. I've not seen them getting bothered at all.
No, not at all. I mean, there's one from Bob here says, Mike, it might be that DJ cabbie had parked on a double yellow. I'm surprised they didn't clamp the taxi. This from Mark Nottingham, by the way. I'm just going to read this out because it's quite funny. We've been handing out bumper stickers, of course, and sending them all over the country to those of you who know, you know. But if you haven't got one yet, don't worry. Be patient. There'll be another batch along soon. This is our map that we've got, though. A map of common sense, which basically shows where all of the bumper stickers are going. And we've just had one in, actually, from Sally in the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides, which is about as far north as I can think of. Mark Nottingham, though, says this: Mike, I fully appreciate there are many more important things going on in the country, especially under the current regime, but I have to make a correction to your montage of bumper stickers for the sake of accuracy, which I know is important to talkTV. My surname is Nottingham. I've never lived in Nottingham. I don't live in Nottingham, and I have no intention of moving to Nottingham. As stated in my message, I live on the Isle of Anglesey. Please edit it if possible. Well, that would be good, you see. So I don't think we've got one in Anglesey. Please note, this is in no way going to affect my allegiance to talkTV, and especially your job, your show, and you'll do a fantastic job. Life would be a great deal worse without you. Keep up the good work. And that's Mark in Anglesey. Funny enough, I used to know a guy called Mark Anglesey, right, who didn't live in Nottingham either. It's a real problem, this, isn't it? Anyway, we apologise to you, Mark Nottingham. We'll try and get it fixed as soon as we can. Let's talk now to Mike Neville, retired Scotland Yard Detective Chief Inspector, because the story that we all knew was coming, the story that I said was happening at the time, and it's on the front page of the Telegraph this morning, is that basically the police got it massively wrong over Southport. They didn't release information which would have probably stopped the riots from happening, or at least made them a lot less bad. Mike, very good morning to you. We said this at the time. I mean, I know, as you do, the rules of contempt of court. I knew that Keir Starmer was hiding behind them. I knew the police were hiding behind them, the CPS as well. And now a Common Select Committee says that we were right and they were wrong.
Absolutely, Mike. And I've had some personal involvement in this. I've done Freedom of Information Act requests to try and find out who authorised the photographs of Rudy Cabana to be released, the Welsh choir boy images. And no one can... The Merseyside police are denying ever releasing them. Merseyside police they sort of deny that they took the line that he was this Welsh choir boy. So that came from somebody, in my view, high up in government. And so when we talk about misinformation, there was real misinformation being spread by official sources, which just did not help at all. And the police said the CPS told them things. Why the police do not have to listen to the CPS in these matters. And so this void of information, or this misinformation, just made matters worse.
There's no question, is there? Because there is clearly a recommendation as well that by using and misusing information, the Merseyside police were at fault. They decided, and the CPS says that it was all done off their own bat. They say it was nothing to do with CPS advice, even though Merseyside police have said basically that was why they did it. But to not mention his religion, but they say risk prejudice to the trial, which was in fact the opposite was true.
Absolutely. And what struck me is that within hours, Rudy Cabana wasn't some sort of international villain. He lived in a house with his parents.
Yeah.
And so when the police raided that house, the ricin would have been found, the Al-Qaeda handbook would have been found. And so the Prime Minister and others would have been briefed about this within that day. And so much information was already known. And you know as well as I do when trials occur, when somebody's charged, that the information is released. And the judge authorised his details to be given out. He was 17 at the time, but 18 a few days later. So there was all sorts of information that could have been used to possibly calm things down. No, there's no excuse for people attacking the police and smashing things, trying to burn down hotels and the like. There's no excuse for that at all. But the authorities have to look at themselves and see how they handle this.
Yeah, and there's no question as well, because I think this will be the next part of the puzzle that gets unsolved, is the amount of people sent to prison, and for the length of time the people were sent to prison for things that they did. Many of those people in other situations committing the crimes that they were accused of doing and the crimes they admitted to would never in 100 years have gone to prison, and if they did go, would never have gone for as long.
These are people, as you know, the woman who was sentenced, the mother was sentenced to 31 months for the Facebook post. So that's what she said was totally unacceptable, but it's something that she could have been cautioned for. This is somebody with no previous convictions whatsoever. And the report also mentions, it sort of exonerated the police. There's no two-tier policing. Well, they seem to have forgotten things, because if you think 10 days before this, you had the riot in Hare Hills in Leeds, where the police actually just they abandoned that area of Leeds where the police were helping the social services to take some children into care. And then at the time of the Southport riots, you'll also remember the West Midlands Police, a superintendent called Emlyn Richards, was actually negotiating with community leaders, Muslim community leaders, and at the same time, the Sky reporter was being threatened with a knife by the same sort of people. So when they said there's not two-tier policing, my answer to this is this, Mike. When people say there's not two-tier policing, go to the Notting Hill Carnival, twerk with the WPCs to the point of indecent assault, smoke cannabis openly and abuse the police. And having done that at Notting Hill, the following Saturday, go to Millwall Football Club and do the same things and see what the police response is at the two places. And there will be your evidence of two-tier policing.
Yes, exactly. And you've said that all along, Mike. Good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Mike Neville, retired Scotland Yard Detective Chief Inspector on the two-tier policing that we all know exists, that Keir Starmer continues to pretend doesn't exist, even as two-tier justice now continues to go through as well. Mike, I can't believe what I just heard, says Nick. Schools are there to educate our kids. They have no business whatsoever in attempting to use the law to control what parents can say about the way these woke brainwashing establishments are now operating. And Brendan says this, Jonathan Reynolds, we need to keep an eye on his CV. The next update may be CEO of British Steel, April 2025. And Terry from Wakefield says, Mike, do you think Keir Starmer will celebrate a week on Wednesday, the 23rd of April? Hopefully we will see the English flag above Downing Street. It's St George's Day. Well, let's see if that happens. I very, very much doubt it, because, of course, the Labour Party think that the St George's flag is a symbol of white supremacy and oppression. So I'm sure they won't be flying it. But if they do, I shall congratulate them for finally seeing common sense. After all, there's enough of it going on here. Coming up next, Harry Cole's here from The Sun. He's got a big column in the paper this morning about British Steel and whether it will actually survive this Labour takeover.
And what you're trying to do by saying that is you're trying to fix me, you're trying to associate me with my client. There is a very well-established
representing them, Frank. You're representing them. You've decided to this is a conversation. I'm not going to be told whether I can talk or not talk. You've decided to represent them.
So you've invited me to talk over me because you're afraid of what I have to say, is that right?
I'm not afraid of what you have to say, but you're saying that I'm associating you with them.
You seem afraid. You seem afraid.
Afraid? We're having a conversation and I'm asking you...
Well, at the bar, we tend to let each other speak. Is that not the convention?
I'm not a barrister, I'm an interviewer.
Across the UK, on DAB+, On your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's coming up to 8:48 here in the world of common sense, the home of common sense, and I'm delighted to say, joining the studio this morning, very privileged, Mr. Harry Cole.
The man of common sense.
Very nice to see you.
It is.
Thank you for popping in.
Monday mornings, it's normally down the line.
I know. Have you had any sleep? Because you were up watching
I was watching golf. I had
yeah.
a bit. It was very exciting.
It was very exciting. And
also, I was quite wired after it finished.
Two British players in the playoff in the Masters. Can't be bad.
Justin Rose coming out of nowhere to win. He was like 125 to 1 at one point. Yeah. Earlier.
Yeah, I used to do a bit of spread betting on the old golfing scenario. It would have been some money to be made there.
It was phenomenal, and that sort of raw emotion at the end.
Yeah,
that was real.
Incredible stuff. Yeah. Absolutely brilliant. Let's talk about your column this morning. Steel ourselves for net zero disaster. I mean, if you were just somebody landing here from Mars on Saturday, you'd have gone, oh, isn't it great? The British Parliament sits on a Saturday and they're dealing with this emergency legislation to save British steel. But when you sort of sit back and go, what's actually happened here? Well, they haven't really saved anything, have they?
Passing a law on the nod in a single day never normally goes that well. They haven't really had a good time to stress test it. It actually reminded me of when they pushed through net zero in 90 minutes of Commons debate.
They like a quick debate, don't they?
On big matters like this. Right. I just thought that seems incredible. You got it's like something out of some sort of Netflix drama. You got the men from the ministry arriving at the plant to take it over after the Chinese have sabotaged it, and the Royal Navy, we read, is on standby to bring in Japanese coal at twice the price it would have been if we'd mined it ourselves in the mine that Labour shut down in September. Yeah. And you just think, if this isn't a line in the sand for all this net zero stuff, then what will be?
Yes.
And if Ed Miliband can't see that this is a warning sign, how many more times are we going to see this? How many more bits of our industry are we going to have to nationalise? Yeah. What happens when the North Sea oil and gas stuff starts to dry up and it has a knock-on effect on the British chemicals industry? We're going to nationalise them as well. Yeah. What about what happened to Port Talbot? Why have they nationalised this one and not the other one?
Exactly.
And so all of these questions mounting up this morning, they're all backslapping themselves, saying, "Oh, this is a great Labour government and national security have saved the country," but they're on the Treasury's desk, on net zero, the net zero office desks, is another Chinese firm who want to build a ginormous wind farm in the North Sea. And these basically got ministers accusing the Chinese firm of deliberately trying to run down and destroy a factory, a steel furnace in the UK, permanently knocking it out of business, and we're going to let them into our wind, into our solar, into our hydro.
And we're giving them a great big new Chinese embassy, which I'll be able to see, I think, out the window from here.
See it from space.
It's just on the other side of Tower Bridge, in Tower Hamlets, which has been given the green light by Labour, who are still cozying up to China, despite what they say.
Exactly. Just as the world is becoming more isolationist, we're making ourselves more reliant on other countries, and you just think, if this isn't a sort of a moment where we could all just go, hang on, are we sure we want to do this? We want to decarbonise all of our industry, all of our factories, and all of our homes in the next 25 years, 2.5 decades.
And we won't be steel if we do go down the green steel route, which is what Starmer says he wants to do. Green steel isn't any good for making tanks. It's no good for making warships or planes. It's no good for making cars.
These
because
electric
it's basically
furnaces.
they don't work.
Where are you going to get the electricity from?
We're already losing £700,000 a day. Yeah. We've now taken that into taxpayer control.
And the point I'm sort of making in the paper today is, if it's not going to come through common sense, home of common sense, if it's not going to come through having their eyes opened by just what's in front of them, this is going to have to come down to the ballot box. Yeah. And the reason they're so hot on Scunthorpe, and the reason they've been so quick to act on this, is because Farage and Tice and co have been banging this drum for weeks, calling them and making it clear that this is a major problem. And if net zero isn't going to be stopped, or at least slowed down, or at least put into a sort of a rational perspective, then it's going to have to come down to the ballot box. And in these seats that Labour won back, the backbone of their majority, those red wall seats that Boris Johnson won in 2019, Labour took. Labour took in 2024, but it's really interesting. In 31 of those key former industrial areas, Labour's vote actually went backwards. The only reason they took those seats back is because the Tories' vote collapsed even more, and that's because Reform ate into the Tories. And now Farage, he's coming for Labour.
He's coming for Labour.
It's going to be fascinating.
It will be.
It's really interesting to see him outflanking them almost on the left.
I mean, the other problem, of course, is that you've got the nationalisation thing hasn't really happened. I mean, all they've really done is they've sort of grabbed control the boardroom, and they're looking to sell it to other people if they can.
And put some junior officials in there to run a blast furnace.
From the Tories, I mean, Ian Duncan-Smith was on with us a little bit earlier, and he said he'd warned the Tory government not to give this away to China. But it was Boris Johnson who actually gave it to the Chinese.
As I say, the Tories have the lion's share of the blame for a lot of this net zero stuff, which is why it's going to be tricky, I think, for Kemi to be able to sort of reposition herself as the anti-net zero person, because she's just a passenger on Farage's bus now.
I mean, that's it. That's a very good way of putting it, because in the end, the point is that she said we'll slow net zero down, but she still won't walk away from it. And every Tory MP that I get on here and I say, will you give up net zero? They're very reluctant to do so.
I think the idea of getting there eventually, fine, or getting close to it, fine, but the idea that we should do it unilaterally, cut ourselves off from the rest of the world, be the only member of the G7, G20, I think, without Virgin Steel production. I think I saw Virgin Steel at Glastonbury once. Good band.
Yeah, very good.
But like the idea, which
supported by Anthrax.
The idea that we, in pursuit of what is an ideological goal, it's not it's an ideological matter.
It is.
We should, literally cut off our nose.
It's also a complete shibboleth. I mean, I've been banging on about it for years. There's no politician in the world that can answer the question, what happens when we get to net zero? Because they don't know.
Well, what happens
they don't
when
really
we get to net
understand
zero, if we do at this rate, and China and America and India and Brazil and all these other great emerging powers of the world carry on doing what they're doing, we're going to be left behind.
Exactly. So is Ed Miliband for the chop then? Will they finally get rid of him?
I don't know. If you look at some of those, I think he's almost too big for in terms of Labour. Starmer's got a tricky relationship with the left of his Labour Party at the moment. They all see him, because he talks about immigration and things, they all see him as a sort of swivel-eyed right-winger, which is, ridiculous. But he does need to watch his left flank. And if you look at, there's a website called Labour List, which sort of polls the Labour membership. Ed Miliband and Angela Rayner are the most popular members of the cabinet amongst Labour members.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, he's a politician. He's got to keep his coalition alive. And I think going after Ed Miliband would put him on a collision course with the left of his party.
Yeah, my goodness me. Yeah. And the other problem, of course, for him is Tulip Sadiq. Her lawyer says absolute rubbish. She has not got a plot of land in Dhaka.
Yeah, well, she said she didn't have a load of flats in London. But turns out that was perhaps a little bit misleading.
Recollections may differ.
Indeed.
And, she didn't realise who gave her the flat. She didn't know where it came from.
Well, how does she know she doesn't have a plot of land in?
Somebody bought me a surprise plot of land in Scotland. It turned out to be about 2 inches square, but you can do it. And you can buy one on the moon as well if you want. But, I mean, the other problem he's got, of course, is that there's a great piece in The Guardian today saying that of 80 seats in Labour's sort of red wall section may fall at the next election, not obviously the locals, because there's more people on PIP disability allowance than there are actually in the majorities of those constituencies. So they'd all go.
The risk you take, there's a risk you take there when you go after that, and then if you look at the numbers of voting patterns, perhaps, a underrepresented proportion of people at the ballot box.
Yes, perhaps. Well, that's also true. Also, every time any Labour minister gets on television, they seem to be making out that I was watching a bit of Question Time the other night. I know. I do it out of duty only. And what's his name? Bryant was on from South Wales saying, "Oh well, don't worry, we're not going to take anybody's PIP allowance away until the next assessment." And then he went, the next assessment might not be for another 5 years. No. So what's he talking about?
They're slightly, I think they've been, again, it goes back to that party management line of, I think they were surprised by the
reaction.
From their own side.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the Tories will go along with these reforms. At the end of the day, it's Starmer's own MPs who get this passed.
Right. But, I mean, the majority is big enough for him not to worry.
Well, that's the thing.
But the trouble is he's assailed on all points now. I mean, the migration story is huge this morning for us as well.
Yeah.
And he's still in trouble over Southport, and the new Select Committee report.
Yeah.
Problems everywhere.
Smashing the gangs ain't going that well, and it's up 46% on the year, is it?
It really
that's
isn't.
on his watch.
Yeah. And, I mean, there's nothing good. And then trying to make out this is good news. James Murray's coming on the show in the next hour. I'm sure he'll try and make out that they've saved the planet. But they haven't saved anything.
Yeah, but I mean, look, they've sort of woken up to the problems, and they're saying the right sort of things. But as you say, they haven't actually nationalised British Steel. They're sort of dangling the threat of it. They're saying they're going to smash the gangs. They're saying they're going to get tough on immigration. They're saying they're going to get tough on benefits. But will the reality meet the rhetoric? And that's where previous governments, especially Boris's, have got into trouble. Is that you promise the moon on the stick, and it doesn't actually quite meet what is actually delivered. And there's two arguments. One, that voters actually, but they like to see people trying, because their expectations for ministers and governments are so low anyway.
Yes.
You need to be seen to be trying.
Right.
That didn't work for Rishi Sunak, did it?
And now, of course, they're off on hold for, what, 2-3 weeks?
Easter.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to all the Labour MPs tweeting about the little memes about Easter, like they did about every other pretty much religious ceremony.
Yeah, they won't be doing that, but they all tweeted about how they were coming to work on a Saturday, which has gone down very well here, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Oh my God! And this is a surprising text I've got from Howard. Mike Top Show, he says, gone up a level with Harry on.
Oh,
thanks, Howard. What is he suggesting? He's suggesting that it wasn't that good.
I should come in more often. It's a beautiful morning.
It is a lovely morning. What about Starmer? Doesn't he need a holiday anytime soon?
I think he probably gets Easter off, right? I mean, he every single holiday he's ever tried to have, he's had to delay it by at least a few days. But that's, them's the breaks, as a great man once said.
Indeed. Harry Cole, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We got a quick voice note from Darren on WhatsApp.
Morning, Mike. Darren from Southport. Great show as ever. Just ask yourself, why have we got these chat groups in the first place? Well, if you weren't teaching kids ideology about the possibility of them changing sex, or you weren't riling up the parents every 5 minutes by teaching them woke nonsense, they wouldn't be there probably. So let's concentrate on the problem. The problem is infiltration by the left in our education establishments.
Absolutely right. We'll be back coming up after the news. In the next hour, we'll be talking to the government, believe it or not. They're coming on. We'll see you after the news.
How much, ladies and gentlemen?
This morning about a new theme park which is going to be built. The Universal Studios apparently going to build it in Bedfordshire. We've been asking many of you to give us some ideas for theme parks. Alison in South Wales says in the new theme park at 5 p.m. every day they could have the PIP parade. All the people driving their brand new Motability cars.
Instead of the water rapids, you can have a road you go down that's full of potholes in a car with bad suspension and flat tyres. I don't know why they're bothering building a theme park in this country. They're going right, no one will be able to afford to go to it anyway.
How about the Rachel Reeves ride, says Terry in Birmingham. You go round and round and vanish up your own deficit. It's the HS2 ride. It travels at high speed for 10 feet, where everyone gets off and into the replacement bus ride. Tickets are £50 if bought 5 months in advance, or £1,000 on the day.
There's a strong rumour going around that Rachel Reeves is going to have a kissing booth at this theme park. So what I do, mate, I shove a £5 in the pot and you can go in and fill your boots.
Thank you very much indeed. Very generous of you. One from G, who says fast-track entry to every ride for illegals, plus a free night stay in the park's hotel and free food. New theme park bumper cars will have to pay a congestion charge, and the funhouse isn't built yet, despite Angela Rayner's pledge to build houses. And what about Ghost Train doesn't move because the driver's on strike? Have a good day. This is brilliant for the theme park. How about grow your own cannabis farm? Yeah, that's a good one. An Ethiopian safari park narrated by Angela Rayner, says Gary in Durham. How about that? This sums up the Labour Party to me. The one idea they have to improve growth for the economy is to basically have a bloody big fun fair. It's the type of idea primary school children would pitch, given 10 minutes to come up with something. Well, it turns out, Matt, in Royston, that it's not even their idea. But they're now trying to claim it's their idea, even though it was actually the Tories.
They have done brilliantly on breakfast, but on Drive you've done brilliantly as well. Downhill slide rides surrounded by ULEZ cameras so that people are fined on exit. Love it. You could have a Birmingham-themed Whack the Rat stall. If you whack the rat, you can have your bin emptied for free. On the Labour theme park, a house of mirrors where they're all boarded up because they can't bear to look themselves in the eye.
I've got a great one for you, mate.
This is for the is this for the Universal theme park run by Labour?
Yeah, moat right around the park.
Yeah.
With loads of dinghies. Call it a channel and say anyone who can break in, all is free.
Imagine a Scouser say you can break into a theme park for free.
Hi, Jeremy. Hey, it's simple. You've got the Labour Ghost Train.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, coming up to 3 minutes past 9, and we are here. It's Monday, 14th of April, in for another hour, of course. Judy Hartley-Brewer will be taking over then. There's so much to talk about this morning. British Steel, has it been saved by the taxpayer? Has it been saved by Keir Starmer? Has it been saved by Jonathan Reynolds, the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry? I'm not entirely sure it's been saved at all. Coming up in this hour, Harriet Baldwin, Shadow Business Minister, joins us. Mark Littlewood's here, Director of Popular Conservatives UK, and James Murray, who's Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, and a man who will know a thing or two about how much money we're going to be spending on this British Steel saving, will let us know what the Labour government is actually going to do, because as far as we know, there still isn't any fuel, any coal to actually keep the furnaces going in Scunthorpe, so we're still waiting to hear news about whether the shipment of coal, which is coming from Japan, is actually anywhere near Britain at this point. It's being held offshore, I think, by the Royal Navy, who are on standby to go nick it. We spoke to Ian Duncan-Smith a bit earlier on. He said, well, we should have it by now, shouldn't we? Maybe what we should do is ask for evidence from the new head of British Steel, the new boss of British Steel, no less, who used to be, of course, a solicitor.
Before the last election, I worked as a solicitor in Manchester city centre, and I would travel in to Manchester every day from what is now my constituency.
Yeah, unfortunately that turned out not to be right, and I'm afraid this year Jonathan Reynolds had to make a correction.
I made a reference to my experience of using our local transport system in Greater Manchester when I worked as a solicitor in Manchester city centre. I should have made clear that specifically, Madam Deputy Speaker, that was a reference at the time to being a trainee solicitor. I would like to formally correct the record.
Yeah, how did that trainee solicitorship go? Did you become a solicitor? No. So you were never a solicitor then? No. So it's not really a correction, is it? No. It was just a lie, wasn't it? Yeah, I'm afraid it was. That's the trouble with these people. They don't seem to know the difference between the truth and a lie. Surprising, really, isn't it? We'll be talking as well about the police silence on Southport. Apparently that made the rioting worse. That's an MP's committee that said that. We've got some army people going into Birmingham to solve the bin crisis. They're being sent there by Angela Rayner, who's now presumably made herself the new commander of the NATO forces or something in the UK. Yeah, just put that on the CV, love. That'll be fine. Put it down. Go on. But they're not actually going to be on the streets to empty the bins. They're just going to be sitting in offices. Some of them might even be working from home. Oh, for heaven's sake. Meanwhile, the NHS have admitted that they place non-whites above everybody else in the queue for jobs inside the NHS. And the Greater Manchester Police have been walking around asking anyone who looks like they might be from an ethnic minority if they fancy a job in the police. Doesn't matter if you've got no qualifications, just come on in. Come on, let's go for it. And the Border Force have been teaching people how to stroke their dogs. And I'm not talking about immigrants either. I'm talking about the dogs that they have, which are supposed to be sniffer dogs. For God's sake, it's 6 minutes past 9. Where's all the common sense? It's right here. Also, everybody seems to have woken up to the idea that doing business with China might be a bit trickier than you thought. And Boris Johnson, by the way, should not get away with the fact that it was he and the last Conservative government, or last but one or two, or was it three, actually sent the steelworks down to China to say, don't worry, they can all run it for us. Harriet Baldwin's here, Shadow Business Minister. Harriet, very good morning to you.
Morning, how are you?
Very well indeed. Has British Steel been saved for the taxpayer? Are we going to be lumbered with a bucket load of expensive steel which nobody wants?
Well, you can see that we are clueless when we ask the government about how much this is going to cost. The taxpayer, we know, is now on the hook for a lot of the bills at British Steel. And we also know that the government clearly dropped the ball in terms of these negotiations. Before July last year, before the general election, we had some advanced negotiations with this company to put considerably more investment into the UK, into the transition to electric arc furnaces, and we think that the government dropped the ball when they came in July. They had no plan. When we asked them about this in the Commons, they would just say they were developing a steel strategy, and what we can see is that they've dropped the ball in these negotiations. Whenever this government negotiates, whether it's on the Chagos, whether it's on Birmingham bins, it seems to be that the taxpayer loses out, and this situation is no different.
And the problem for the the country, really, is net zero, isn't it? And I mean, you know, you have to say the Tories were quite complicit in heading down that particular road. I mean, Boris Johnson loved the idea of net zero. I think perhaps we got to the point where Rishi Sunak was less enamoured with it, but he still didn't really change it much. So, you know, I would say that certainly the viewers and listeners to this show all feel that, you know, sort of Westminster generally is a bit complicit in all of this.
I think it's something that generally is very popular to move towards cleaner sources of energy over time. But what you will have heard from Kemi Badenoch under new leadership of our party, that she's said we do need to have a better plan for this. We need to. She's an engineer by background, and she's been calling for a rethink on this. So I do think that we have led the world, that we need to move in that direction of cleaner energy, but we also need to make sure that on that journey we invest in things like new nuclear here in the UK, rather than becoming entirely dependent on Chinese-made wind farms.
Well, that is the problem, isn't it, with Chinese connections all over the place. You know, they're about to build a huge embassy in London, which a lot of people are very concerned about in terms of the spying capability that they're going to have. We spoke to Ian Duncan-Smith a bit earlier on, who's got a special interest in China because they basically banned him from going anywhere near their country, and he's on their sort of watch list, if you like. But, you know, there's wind farms that are going to be built with Chinese, you know, hardware. There's solar farms being built all with Chinese hardware. You know, there's no seemingly sort of voice stopping that.
Well, I'm also disappointed that, you know, Ed Miliband and this Labour government seems intent on us not exploiting our oil and gas reserves and yet importing more from around the world. And I do think we are living in a new global reality where we have to look at these kinds of critical national infrastructure and make sure that we have that resilience nationally. So it's absolutely right that all of these things get looked at closely, and I would urge the government to do that.
OK, good to talk to you. Harriet Baldwin, thank you very much indeed. Shadow Business Minister. We've got Mark Littlewood with us as well, Director of Popular Conservatism. Let me just ask you this one from Janice in Staffordshire. Mike, they keep saying that if the fires go out in the steel furnaces, that that'll be it, as it's impossible to relight them. Now, my point is, when they were first built, how did they then fire them up? Just get the blokes that first worked there and ask them how they started the furnaces. Well, that's fairly logical. I assume it may be not quite as simple as that. I don't know. Dave says, morning, Mike. Now Parliament is sat on a Saturday, maybe long-haul Hoyle can go on some more jollies to push the benefits of weekend working, says Dave in Colne. Yeah, very good. I see what you did there. Let's talk to Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism UK. Mark, a very good morning to you.
Top of the morning to you, Mike.
I'm less than convinced that British steel has been saved by the Labour government. I don't know about you, but I suspect you might have some sympathy for the view that this is a bit like putting an elastoplast over a gaping wound, and it's not going to hold for very long.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it there, Mike, with your discussion with Harriet Baldwin. The problem is that we've got so many regulations in place, largely around net zero, but a whole swathe of other regulations as well, that our energy prices in Britain are about 4 times that of the USA. And guess what? Making steel is a pretty energy-intensive industry. Yes. So it's just not economic to make steel in the UK, thanks to all of the mad regulations we've brought. So you now get into the sort of second-tier problem of, well, if you are determined to make steel with all of those mad regulations in place, no business is really going to want to do it for reasons of turning a profit. Either the Chinese are going to want to do it for nefarious reasons, or the taxpayer's going to have to do it. Well, the longer-term solution, if they can, you know, make sure this furnace stays alight, is to actually get rid of all those ridiculous net zero regulations if you want a steel industry in Britain at all. Because if it ain't economic, no business is going to invest in it.
Well, that's right. But also the other problem for me is that green steel, which is what they seem to be wanting to transition into, is not going to be the kind of steel that can be used to build tanks or military jets or warships or anything that we need for our military industrial complex, really. And it's only really kind of soft steel. It's not virgin steel, so it's not something that we can make use of, really.
Yeah, another example of all of the incredible wishful thinking you get around so many of these green sort of arguments, Mike. Look, I mean, Harriet Baldwin was right in the interview you just had with her. We are moving into a different global reality. That doesn't mean we need to produce everything ourselves, but it does mean that we need to make sure we can quickly get our hands on them.
I mean, another example you were just touching on is we're trying to bring in this coal from Japan, having just closed down our last remaining coal mines ourselves. How is that remotely sensible, good for the environment, or in any way a sensible strategic place for the United Kingdom to find itself? So we've got to make sure, if we're not producing things ourselves that could be of great strategic value, that we at least have security of supply. I mean, I'm not even sure we've got that.
Well, no, because if we manage to get the coal off the ship that's currently sitting in the North Sea, then presumably as soon it's a bit like putting coal on your fire in the house, isn't it? You've got to go back out to the bunker and get some more because you know that it's going to burn off. So where's the next ship coming from, you know? And I'm told that Japan also is a net importer of coal. So it's probably not, it might even be Chinese coal that we brought from Japan.
God only knows. I mean, again, our energy industry has really been a disaster now for decades, Mike. And part of it is politicians keep interfering. They can't decide whether they're pro-nuclear or anti-nuclear. Conservatives, thankfully, are now moving away from net zero, but as you fairly point out, they were the cheerleaders for net zero. I mean, you would have to be a very brave person indeed to invest in any form of any sector of the energy industry at all in Britain, because the rules are likely to change at any point. The rug's going to be pulled under your feet. You can only turn a profit if you've got some mystic meg ability to predict what the government is likely to do in future with regard to the rules and regulations. That's not really a kind of business operation, a sensible business operation. That's one complete uncertainty and randomness. So we've got to reset all of our rules here if we're remotely serious, not just about preserving British steel production, if that's what we want to do, but actually ensuring that our general energy bills come down, not just for domestic use, but for all industrial use as well. No wonder Britain isn't very competitive.
Yeah, and no, it's far too expensive in every single way. Great to talk to you, Mark Littlewood. Thank you very much indeed, Director of Popular Conservatism UK. We've got lots more to do. We'll take some calls as well at the end of the show. 0344 499 1000. You can send us a voice note there as well. Coming up, we're going to speak to the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury. That's right, His Majesty's Government in the form of James Murray, MP. And we'll find out what he's got to say coming up next.
I got a holding answer effectively on Tuesday saying they were still talking. So I don't understand why it took until Thursday before the Prime Minister woke up to the reality, which people on the ground knew, and that is that the owners of British Steel had plans to close down the blast furnaces in June at the latest, and perhaps sooner than that.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's coming up to very nearly 19 minutes past 9. It's got a voice note from Adrian with some good news.
Morning, Mike. Wonderful show as always. Very worried about Isabel's mental health. Obviously, I know she's left the country to live, but she sounds really low. Anyway, here's some good news for her. All we do is get a government in, actually, which changes all these nonsense laws. We bin the hate crimes, we bin the Equalities Act, and then suddenly the police won't have anything to do with those. We'll have to get back to doing the normal policing stuff. Job done. Oh, and patrol the channel. Put our troops on the beaches rather than in Birmingham. And that's Adrian from Heathfield. Have a good day.
Adrian from Heathfield, very nice. I'll pass that message on to Isabel. I'm sure she's probably still listening anyway. Got this from Julie in Notts. Here's a random story for you, Mike. Travelled from Nottingham to Cardiff yesterday. Didn't run into Mark Nottingham, did you, by any chance? And apparently the 9.15, the 10.15, the 12.15, the 13.16, the 14.15, the 16.15 and the 17.15, plus most later trains were all cancelled. I caught the 11.15 train, which was late departing, as the guard couldn't get to Nottingham station because his train was cancelled last minute, so he had to get a taxi to Nottingham. My train was crammed with people standing as far as Gloucester, arrived at Cardiff this morning, and the 8.45 to Nottingham had been cancelled. My ticket cost £99. Fantastic. Well done, cross-country, mown over. I mean, that is incredible, isn't it? And this one from Terry in Slough. Mike, I wouldn't trust this useless, incompetent Labour government to run a raffle, never mind this great country of ours. An awful lot of people say the same. One from Colin, who says, on school WhatsApp groups, that's one of the stories we've been talking about this morning, when Joe Biden was president, he allowed the Department of Justice, the DOJ, to use their powers to get involved with PTAs, parent-teacher associations, and of using the FBI to remove awkward and objectionable parents complaining about left-wing school curriculums from meetings. As the saying goes, America sneezes and the UK catches a cold. Well, it wouldn't be at all surprising, would it, if you found out that an awful lot of the policies that were coming into use in this country actually had emanated from the Democrats in America. Let's not forget, this is indeed the party which went and supported Kamala Harris and sent a couple of hundred people over, basically, to talk about supporting her view of becoming the new president. One here from Nick, who says, Mike, I can't believe what I just heard. Schools are there to educate our kids, surely. They have no business whatsoever in attempting to use the law. Well, I think that's absolutely right. Let's talk now, though, to James Murray, MP, Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury. He's joined us from College Green, I believe. A very good morning to you, James.
Hi, good morning.
Thanks for joining us. British Steel is the big order of the day. Jonathan Reynolds, as Business Secretary, has written in the Times today that's why we are willing to spend capital, both political and financial, to give British business the backing it needs to get through this uncertainty. How much money are you willing to spend on British Steel?
So it's a really important question, and if you look at Jingye, the company who owns the Scunthorpe Steelworks, their accounts show that their losses were around £233 million in the most recent year that they've reported figures. Now, we think we can do better than that, but I think the real comparison here is with the alternative. The alternative is that we hadn't come in on Saturday to change legislation in Parliament, that we weren't stepping in with having officials on the ground trying to get the raw materials into the blast furnaces, and the blast furnaces would therefore be closing. And if they closed, then we would be on the hook for north of £1 billion worth of costs as a result of land remediation and dealing with workforce issues and so on. So the best way of us stepping in, the best way of us intervening is to make sure that we keep the blast furnaces going, because Jingye had been behaving irresponsibly in the last few days, saying they were going to accelerate the closure of the blast furnaces. We need to keep them going to help secure the future of steel making in the UK.
And to keep them going, you need the coal, which I believe is still currently being imported from Japan and is sitting on a ship somewhere. Do you know where that coal is and when it's going to be delivered?
Well, we know that the raw materials that are needed at the moment are in the UK and nearby. What's happening at the moment is that officials under the direction of the business secretary are on site doing everything they can to get those raw materials into the blast furnaces and keep them going. Now, there is a limit on what I can say because there are commercial processes underway, and I don't want to say anything that would undermine those commercial processes, but I'm confident that we are doing everything possible to get those raw materials into the blast furnaces and keep them going.
Well, what commercial processes would prevent you from saying that you're going to put the coal into those furnaces before they go out? Because presumably that's what has to be done, which means it's time sensitive. So surely you can say how long that's going to take.
Well, that's exactly what we want to do, to get the coke, to get the raw materials into the blast furnaces, to keep them going. And that's the reason why we were in Parliament on Saturday passing the legislation to give us the powers to do so, because it became apparent in recent days that Jingye was acting irresponsibly. They were accelerating the closure of the blast furnaces. That's why we had to come into Parliament on Saturday, pass that legislation, and why on the back of the powers granted by that legislation, we now have officials working to get the raw materials into the blast furnaces and keep them going.
And once that has arrived and is being used, where's the next supply coming from? Because you closed down the only place in Britain that could have produced it.
No, that's not the case. The Cumbrian coal mine that I think you're talking about actually produced not the right material that is needed in Scunthorpe, so that wouldn't have helped in this situation. But what we need to do is keep the blast furnace going, because what we want in terms of the long-term future of Scunthorpe is to find a private sector partner to co-invest with us to give it a really bright and sustainable future for steel making in the UK at Scunthorpe. If the blast furnaces had closed as a result of Jingye's irresponsible actions, then we wouldn't even have that opportunity. And it's only because we took those powers on the weekend, which are now being implemented today, that we have the opportunity to secure that long-term future.
So you're not nationalising in the long term, are you?
Not in the long term, we want to find a private sector partner. I mean, I should be upfront, as the business secretary was at the weekend, that in the coming days and weeks, nationalisation may seem a likely option. But in the long term, we want to find a private sector partner who will co-invest in the steelworks to provide that sustainable future.
And how long would you expect to be running this organisation then, with Jonathan Reynolds at the head of it?
Well, look, I'm not in a position to give timescales now. Right now, we're focused on what happens today, which is getting those raw materials into the blast furnaces to keep them going and being clear about what our long-term plan is. And the long-term plan is to find a private sector partner to co-invest with us for the future of the steelworks.
OK. And if Jingye have behaved so badly, and so much so they were trying to sabotage the plant at the weekend, why are they even still in the company? I mean, why are they still the major shareholders?
Well, look, it's clear that they've behaved irresponsibly, and that's why we've taken the action that we did on Saturday. These are not steps that any government should take lightly. The actions that we took because of the urgency of the situation, because of the way that Jingye were behaving. We've been engaging with them since the general election. We made them a very generous offer to continue production. They then did not accept that. They accelerated in the last few days plans to close the blast furnaces, and that's why there was an urgency for us to pass the legislation at the weekend, giving us the powers to make sure those blast furnaces stay open.
Yes, but why are they still shareholders, though, if they behave like this?
Well, as I say, well, look, conversations about ownership, nationalisation, therefore a little further down the line. What was an urgent necessity over the weekend was to give the business secretary the powers to direct officials to go in there and get the raw materials in to keep the blast furnaces going. As the business secretary said at the weekend, nationalisation is a likely option in the immediate future. But in the long term, we want to get that private sector partner in to co-invest with us.
OK, and just one final one. Are you absolutely confident that the raw materials will arrive in time?
Well, I'm confident we're doing everything we can to get them in there because we want to keep those blast furnaces going.
That's not the same thing. Are you confident they will arrive in time?
I said earlier, because of commercial processes that I do not want to undermine. There are limits to what I can say.
I don't know what those are. I can't understand what those would be. Are you confident that they will arrive in time?
I've explained that I'm confident we're doing everything we can to get them in there to keep the blast furnaces going.
Well, good luck with that then. Thanks very much indeed. James Murray MP, Executive Secretary to the Treasury. Let's get some reaction on what he just said. Richard Tice is here, Deputy Leader of Reform UK. Richard, very good morning to you.
Very good morning to you. Well, I was just listening to James Murray there, the Labour minister. I've just got to correct him and the nonsense that's coming out of the Labour government about the West Cumbrian coal mine that they declined to allow to proceed. That coal mine is full of coking coal, which is the exact coal that British Steel want in Scunthorpe. I was in Scunthorpe. I was at the blast furnaces with Nigel Farage last Tuesday, and the British Steel executives told me that they could use that coking coal from West Cumbria, which would have created hundreds of jobs, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of extra value. And yet the government, I'm going to say, is lying about the coal from West Cumbria because they are so embarrassed that Red Ed, who I now call Jet Ed, the flying green hypocrite, because he closed that coal mine down. I mean, it is just an absolute scandal.
And this business of the, as they call it, raw materials, I mean, you're in business and you've been in business. I mean, what does he mean when he says there are commercial sensitivities around whether they can say when the raw materials are going to be arriving in the steel plant in Scunthorpe and when they can be put into the furnace?
Look, they're just basically trying to cover their backsides. The truth is, when we were there last Tuesday, it was clear there was, and that's why we called it out. We said there's only 3 working days to save the Scunthorpe blast furnaces. And the Chinese Jingye firm have acted in bad faith. I think they have probably deliberately tried to sabotage primary steelmaking in the United Kingdom. We've called that out, and I urged the government over the weekend to nationalise British Steel fully. I understand that whilst Jingye literally sold the raw materials from ships in transit from places like Japan, there are some raw materials at Birmingham. I guess what he's nervous about saying he'll guarantee, and then something happens. So, but I think they will have the materials to keep the blast furnaces going. There's some amazing people there, absolutely dedicated to keeping them going. I think they'll do that. And then the conversation rapidly needs to move on to the sort of long-term strategic thinking that I've been talking about, long-term procurement contracts of those very raw materials, the coking coal, iron ore and things, on a sort of 10, 15-year view. And then you can have long-term contracts with the public sector for the great products that British Steel produces, the rail, the special profiles, and much more. That way, you know, your input costs, your output costs, obviously you've got a scrap net stupid zero to get your electricity costs down and get rid of the carbon tariffs. By the way, you know they're talking about building 2 new electric arc furnaces at Scunthorpe. Well, you don't need to, because there's 2 redundant electric arc furnaces down the road at Rotherham that have been pretty much idle for the last few years, owned by a company called Liberty Steel, hasn't got the money to reopen them. So what I've been saying to the government is take those also into the bigger group, and then you can have the best of all worlds.
Well, that would be if you keep the original furnaces, though, because that's the ones that make the virgin steel, right?
And we've exactly, and that's what we should be doing. But the reason they were trying to, literally, the government was trying to close those down and replace them with new electric arc furnaces that'll never run because of the cost of electricity. And by the way, I've heard in the last few days that Tata Steel, who, of course, have done the deal with the government, they shut the blast furnaces down at Port Talbot last autumn. They are going to build a new electric arc furnace, but I'm told they'll never turn it on because it'll never be viable, but they will have banked the hundreds of millions of government support. This is the sort of madness and nonsense that's going on because of net stupid zero, and it drives me bonkers every day of the week.
And nobody can afford to run either of these places, any of them, because of the cost of the electricity. I mean, £700,000 a day, because we've got the most expensive electricity. I mean, I was talking to Ian Duncan-Smith a bit earlier on today on the show, and he was telling me that, you know, in France, the electricity cost is half what we pay. In Germany, it's about the same. You know, we are paying way too much. And as you say, Jet Ed Miliband, surely can't be long for this world. But do you find it as well slightly ironic that here you are, deputy leader of what might be considered to be a right-wing political party, actually wanting nationalisation of a steel industry, which Labour is resisting?
Well, Nigel and I have been calling for British Steel to be a strategic national corporation, a strategic national asset, for some 6 years now, because actually it's common sense. I mean, after food and water, steel is absolutely critical steelmaking, the strongest steelmaking. We need it for our defence industries, our tall buildings, etc., etc. So you can apply common sense. You can have long-term patient capital, part public ownership, part long-term pension fund thinking, bring in the best. We've got some brilliant steel expertise. We can make a real success of this. That's the way to do it. Because we come from the world of business, we know how you've got to adapt things to suit the particular circumstances. And steel is very specific, very unique. Here's the proof there, Mike, that you can make steel making work. In Dunkirk, just across the channel, whilst they're busy sending us boats, they're also very busy spending €250 million on refurbishing blast furnaces. What does that tell you?
Yeah.
That tells you, actually, the French know what they're doing. Yes, they've got cheaper electricity. We need that cheaper electricity. And then we can make a great success of it too.
Well, exactly right. And if we can't have these blast furnaces, we can't build ships, we can't build military planes, we can't build tanks. So much for the coalition of the willing. We'll have to rely on European nations to supply us with military equipment.
We're in danger of having a coalition of the incompetent. But let's not forget, it was the Tories that imposed net stupid zero on us. It was the Tories that sold British steel to the Chinese against the advice that Nigel and I gave them 6 years ago. So don't anybody ever forgive or ever forget what they did and how we've ended up in this very bad place.
Interesting. Richard, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, pointing out that James Murray was wrong to suggest that the coking plant up in Cumbria could not have supplied the coke and the coal, or the raw materials, as he puts it, to put into the blast furnaces in Scunthorpe. Simple as that. Morning, Mike, says Susan. Ray James Murray, cobblers. And do they all want a medal for going in on a Saturday? 4 times he said in on a Saturday, then the weekend 4 times, like it was superhero stuff. Plus, they're all starting to speak like Starmer. Just repeat, repeat, repeat. Well, that is the problem. Morning, Mike, says Keith in Durham. Germany produced coking coal, ideal for steel making, so why on earth are we shipping coking coal to Scunthorpe from Japan? Absolutely bonkers. It doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Let's get a voice note from Jay.
Hi, good morning, Mike. Just a quickie, it's Jay from Stockport. I think everybody can see what's happening here with the Labour Party, and that is they are cozying up to the Chinese. They want them to be the suppliers, the people to get in bed with, because then, obviously, they're American haters. They hate Trump, they hate America, so they can tell America, we don't need to do free trade with you or do anything with you, because we're in bed with China. So, yeah, it's, like you say, it's plain as the nose on your face. Great show. Cheers, Mike.
Thank you, Jay. I think it's a very, very bad idea to be cozying up to China, as several people have pointed out on the course of this show alone. Neil in Surrey says this, Mike, the steel blast furnaces at Scunthorpe were empty of coking coal, fuel and iron ore before they were first fired up, and it took several weeks to get the whole system up to temperature to begin the production of steel. The steel production is a continuous flow process from heating the ore to pouring the steel. If the furnaces are starved of supply and go cold, the whole production will solidify and cannot be unfrozen, even if you can relight the furnace. It's like pouring concrete down the drain. If you stop, it sets hard and you cannot start pouring again. Well, a bit like the way they've blocked the fracking wells, a bit like the way that they've cemented up anything that could be in any way considered to be a source of fuel, which might be efficient, but which might be known as fossil fuel. And Ed Miliband, I'm afraid, has led the way on that. So here's what we can say that we got from James Murray. We don't know how much money it's going to cost the taxpayer. We don't know how long the government are going to be in charge with Jonathan Reynolds at the helm of British Steel. We don't know where the next shipment of raw materials is coming from. The current one coming from Japan is likely to be used to keep the furnaces open, but they won't guarantee that because it might all go horribly wrong. So apart from that, it's all a great rescue plan, isn't it? But that's all it is. It's a plan. There is no rescue. We shall see what happens in the long term. 9:37.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's coming up to 20 minutes to 10. I'm Mike Graham here, of course, until 10 o'clock. Julie Hartley-Brewer will be along to talk about what's coming up on her show for the next 3 hours after that. One here from Barry, who says, these bullying police officers are getting worse. Now they've warned an elderly man who has hearing problems that if he said the words "speak English," it could be seen as a hate crime in England. Where is compassion for this elderly, hard-of-hearing man? And lots of you have got plenty to say about that. Liam's got a voice note on James Murray.
Morning, Mike. Liam from Kent. As per usual then, Labour government, no answers. I'm glad that you pressed him on that last question, but once, and as per all of them, funnily enough, he didn't have an answer. And these are the people running our country. There is the reason, right there, why everything in this country has gone to pot. Cheers, Mike. Great show.
Liam, thanks very much indeed. Yeah, I mean, the trouble is we didn't learn an awful lot, did we, from James Murray's input, because I don't think he knows an awful lot. You know, they don't know how much it's going to cost the taxpayer. They say they hope it's going to be less than it cost the Chinese government and the levies that were put on them before. They reckon that it cost them £700,000 a day currently they're losing. They reckon they're going to be able to get the raw material coke supplied into the furnaces so they don't seize up, but they don't want to guarantee it. They say there's some kind of commercial reason why they can't tell us exactly where it all is, which doesn't sound right to me. And so all a bit unsatisfactory, really, isn't it? So let's talk to Richard Gill, Emeritus Professor of Mathematical Statistics and a consultant in forensic science. This is a story that has been going now for many, many a month and may go on for many, many a year. And it's the latest sort of development, I suppose, for want of a better word, in the Lucy Letby story, because there's a new bombshell email that might actually now change things. I don't know whether they will, but it says it could free Lucy Letby. It's a newly revealed memo from a doctor, which now casts some doubt on the court claim that Lucy Letby was caught red-handed. Let's talk to Richard and find out what it's about. Richard, very good morning to you.
Good morning, mate.
Thanks very much for joining us. Yeah, good to see you too. I mean, It's been extraordinary last few months, really, comparing some of the stories around the Lucy Letby case. You know, a woman who was sent to jail for a very, very long time and was declared to be guilty in every single way. With every week that passes, that looks less and less sure, really.
I think it's absolutely clear she's completely innocent and has been fitted up. And like every week and every month, there's been more and more evidence coming that way from Baroness Thirlwell's inquiry, you know, which is set up to exonerate the doctors, but actually it's producing artloads of evidence against them. And what we now know the last few days is actually one of the doctors went on TV to say, yeah, it wasn't a gang of 4, actually it was a gang of 7. He actually says, you know, we conspired, 7 of us. And we have their emails where they discuss how they're going to influence the police. They discuss what they will say to the police and what they won't say to the police, right? We're not going to tell the police how severely ill the babies were. Oh, no. We're not going to tell them that we expect them to die any moment. Oh, no. But we will tell them this, that, and the other. It's quite incredible.
And this latest email would suggest that something has been removed as well. The very important piece of information partly was that she actually called the doctor to ask for his help, and that was kind of not submitted, as it were, to the court.
Yes, well, of course, the authorities close to the Lucy Letby case are saying it was submitted to the court, but then there's the question why the jury didn't get to see it. And I mean, it's even been suggested that the defence even saw it, the earlier defence. But okay, yes, the new information is that Lucy Letby was called, sorry, not Lucy Letby, the doctor, Dr. Avijayaram, the only one who maybe almost saw something, though actually he says he virtually saw her doing something. In other words, he didn't. But what he never said in court is that he was called to that baby by Lucy herself.
Yeah.
So if you believe that Lucy was about to murder that baby, then it's a rather odd that she actually called the consultant to be there to watch her doing it.
And also rather odd that he would send a memo in which he said quite clearly that she called him to inform the doctor of low saturations in oxygen levels. But when he was directly asked in the trial on June the 19th of last year whether he had received a call for help from her, he said no, not at all. Well, isn't that perjury then?
I'm not a lawyer. It sounds like perjury to me. I mean, he was sort of telling some of the truth, but not the whole truth.
Right. Well, he's categorically denying something which he wrote down as something that happened.
Right. Well, that's blatant lying. Yes.
You would think. Yeah. I mean, I just find it extraordinary. But again, I mean,
yeah.
Sorry. I was going to say, I mean, we seem, unfortunately, though, to be... I mean, I'm not like you. I'm not so sure that she's completely innocent. But I've been talking to Peter Hitchens about this for a long time. And I'm certainly sure that there's enough reason to have another trial. And I think that's all, at the moment, that's all that her lawyers are asking for, isn't it?
Well, I mean, another trial would be fine because it will make clear that she is innocent. Actually, I think it's so completely clear and will be clear to the CCRC on the basis of the new medical information they've been given that there's just simply no case against her whatsoever.
Yeah.
Every single one of those babies and every single one of those events died of natural causes, and there's really powerful medical arguments and medical evidence for that. It's sort of not new evidence, but they are new arguments understanding the evidence, which is, of course, the same as it has always been, namely, medical notes and toxicology readings and so on and so forth. That doesn't change.
Yes, and I think it would be extraordinary, wouldn't it, if the legal system in this country didn't recognise that and was very hard and fast on it and just said, no, since there's no new evidence, we can't have another trial, which is what they could do.
Yeah, exactly. It would be appalling. It would be, I mean, it's another enormous loss of reputation of the UK in the world.
It wouldn't
absolutely
be good. Well, listen, Richard, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Richard Gill, Emeritus Professor of Mathematical Statistics and a consultant in forensic science. And this extraordinary latest revelation over the weekend that there's an email or a memo written by the doctor who said that he got a call from Lucy Letby at the time one of the babies was distressed. And when he was asked about it in court, whether she called him, he denied it. Which can only ask you, or lead you to ask the question, why would he do that? It's 9:47. This is Talk.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 9:50, coming up in about 6 or 7 minutes. Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here. Gary says this, Mike, the Chinese have not sabotaged our steel industry. The Chinese didn't need to sabotage our steel industry. We have sabotaged our own steel industry with the pursuit of this crazy net zero policy that has made all heavy industry in this country uncompetitive and therefore not worth investing in. Good luck to the government in finding a private investor who wants to get into bed with them. Well, exactly. I mean, that's why you end up with countries like China wanting to get involved, because they don't care about losing money, because they know that they can influence what happens, whether it's in the industry itself or whether it's in a more sort of, wider global context. Let's get a voice note from Steve.
Mike, Steve here from Bedford. If Richard Tice has spoken to an executive up in Scunthorpe and he says that there's coke over in the West Cumbrian mine, if the executive has actually said that, then why isn't he on the television, on the media, etc., saying exactly this? I can't believe that on an issue so important as this, that there's executives in Scunthorpe with an answer and they're not saying anything. Thanks again. Fabulous show as usual.
Well, Steve, it wouldn't surprise you or me, would it, if they were told not to say anything and that the basic new management is in place, and the new management is the Labour government, and the new management will tell everybody what is going on in Scunthorpe, and nobody else will be allowed to speak about it. So it will just be government ministers who give the view. But, I mean, you heard James Murray there say that coke was, in fact, not suitable for the Scunthorpe plant. When Richard Tice says it is. Now, somebody's not telling the truth here. Let's talk to David, who's in London. David, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you. So I'm nearly choking on my cornflakes.
Sorry about that. So what's going on then, you know?
Well, I mean, look, I saw the other day there's a Japanese freighter held up somewhere in dock,
right,
full of coal, can't get in. What are we doing importing coal from Japan?
I know, which is a net importer of coal, by the way, so it doesn't normally export coal.
Well, I was on the radio many years ago when Tata Steel first bought British Steel.
Yeah.
And I said at the time, look, it's pretty obvious what they're going to do. They're going to run it down, rape it, put cheap Indian steel in. That happened then. Then they flog it off to the Chinese.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't make it up.
I know.
And apparently we're right next door to the steelworks is a mine that's shut.
Yeah, of course there is. Unbelievable. It beggars belief. I don't know where these people have come from who have invested themselves into our parliamentary system and somehow have ruined Britain. I mean, I don't blame just the Labour government. The Tories were just as bad. You know, they're all absolutely at it. David, thanks for your call. Herbie's in Harrow. It's got a nice ring to it, hasn't it? Herbie in Harrow, morning.
Good morning, Mike. I got the name right this morning for you.
Good stuff. What do you got for us?
Mike, I was campaigning in Cumbria where this coal mine was going to be opened.
Yeah.
And it was proven that the coal was ideal for making the best aluminium and best steel in the country.
Right.
It's ideal coke. Why doesn't all the parties get together and hold an amendment at the House of Commons and say, we need to open this mine today and let's see who votes against it. And we'll then see who really is supporting this country and these steelworks. I should think there'd be quite a few, but we need to see exactly how many and how many Labour MPs do not vote for it. Open the coal mine up now so that we're self-sufficient, self-dependent. We don't need it. The coke in there is brilliant coke.
Yeah, absolutely right. Good one. Herbie, thank you very much indeed. This is the problem, isn't it? You know, how can you have government ministers come on this programme and said that coke is not suitable for making British steel and for firing up the furnace? Now, if that turns out to be wrong, then I would say that's a pretty serious mistake to make. Now, he can pretend that he was misinformed, or he can tell me that he thought that when he told the truth that he wasn't actually lying. I don't know what he's going to do to get out of it. If it turns out James Murray's told a lie on this television station, on this radio station, then I think he's in quite a bit of trouble. One from Keith in Oswestry says, is Jonathan Reynolds starting his new job today, or is he going to wait until he's had his 3-week holiday? Well, that's a very good question. Sam in Barnsley, they can't reopen any Yorkshire pits as they've been capped, i.e. concrete's been poured in. And get this, they left millions of pounds of equipment down there and said it was more expensive to bring it up to the pit top. All the best, pal. Absolutely extraordinary. Well, James Murray was here earlier, but we haven't quite got that ready to replay. That is a problem, isn't it? Because here we have a situation where British Steel supposedly is being rescued, right? The Labour government say that they've got everything in place, that they know that they're not going to shut down the furnaces. They can't tell me, though, whether or not the coke and the raw materials are going to arrive in time. They can't tell me how long the government is going to be involved in running British Steel. They say that they're looking for different organisations, different private partners to come in and help them bail out a company which is losing £700,000 a day. The electricity prices alone would suggest that basically it's not a business that can be run in any way profitably. So the problem for me is that we have got a situation here where the government doesn't know how much money we are going to have to commit to it. Absolutely extraordinary stuff. Patty in Colston says this. Right, your listener who just wrote about Starmer not mentioning any Christian days or festivals read my mind. Starmer has even posted about a religion and a festival I've never heard of in my long life. It's pointed out to him so often on social media that I believe it's intentional. And I even wonder if he or his comms team are trying to stir religious tensions for some perverted reason. I don't know. It's very weird. Let's have a little listen to what James Murray had to say just about half an hour ago.
Jingye, the company who owns the Scunthorpe Steelworks, their accounts show that their losses were around £233 million in the most recent year that they've reported figures. Now, we think we can do better than that, but I think the real comparison here is with the alternative. The alternative is that we hadn't come in on Saturday to change legislation in Parliament, that we weren't stepping in with having officials on the ground trying to get the raw materials into the blast furnaces, and the blast furnaces would therefore be closing. And if they closed, then we would be on the hook for north of £1 billion worth of costs as a result of land remediation and dealing with workforce issues and so on. So the best way of us stepping in, the best way of us intervening is to make sure that we keep the blast furnaces going. Because Jingye had been behaving irresponsibly in the last few days, saying they were going to accelerate the closure of the blast furnaces, we need to keep them going to help secure the future of steel making in the UK.
And to keep them going, you need the coal, which I believe is still currently being imported from Japan and is sitting on a ship somewhere. Do you know where that coal is and when it's going to be delivered?
Well, we know that the raw materials that are needed at the moment are in the UK and nearby. What's happening at the moment is that officials under the direction of the Business Secretary are on site doing everything they can to get those raw materials into the blast furnaces and keep them going. Now, there is a limit on...
So the man who was a fake solicitor is now in charge of delivering coal to a very big industrial network of blast furnaces in Scunthorpe. Julie Hartley-Brewer's here.
What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong?
And the MP's making such a big deal of, oh, we worked on a Saturday.
I know.
Get over yourselves.
I know.
I mean, you weren't clearing the bin bags in Birmingham. Go and do something more useful.
They weren't actually there on Friday.
Also, why does it have to be?
Right.
Why do they wait to become an emergency? Here's an idea. Maybe we don't sell our vital steelworks to the Chinese.
There's a good idea.
Mind-blowing. Oh, I know what. Why do we not have deliberate policies for years and years and years from all governments to make our energy prices so expensive that it's impossible to run a profitable steelworks?
And lots of other things.
Mind-blowing stuff.
One of the reasons why so many people are going out of business now is not because they can't afford the national insurance hike, but they can't afford the electricity
Absolutely.
to power their factories.
It's really that simple.
Nonsense.
It's really that simple. I know.